Sorry, boy. But his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good afternoon from the Batcave. It is Saturday, September 28th, 2024, and I'm hopefully going to finish up this Defending the Canon series for now. I may at some point in the future get into a series on the Gnostic writings and the things that came after Christ, because I would put 2nd Esdras and somewhat wisdom into that category. Some of the Essene literature I would assume is probably post-Christian as well, just because these guys were still around after Christ, and they're obviously still influencing the Jews at the time of the revolt that led to the 70 AD destruction. And so I would assume what you probably have in that period is Essenes going from writing literature that's trying to affect Jewish nationalism to writing literature that is meant to kind of endear them to the Christians. And I think, honestly, the Essenes just became Gnostics and monks and stuff like that, and different sects and cults in Christianity started from Essenes afterwards. The more I research about them and their habits and the roots of their ideas and stuff like this, they seem to be so many things that Paul is speaking against in his letters in terms of things to watch out for. And I don't think you just have this known group called the Essenes. I think that name kind of comes out in Josephus's writing. And before that, you just have these people that are dwelling in these different places, and Essene becomes like some catchword for them. It's Essenes in Josephus, and then it becomes Essene. So it seems like they're just heretics. I mean, they're just culty. They're making up false documents all the time. And we can tell that this kind of stuff is common to Judaism, making up fake writings. Well, it's not that terribly different from what you have in, the Christian era, from really, the Reformation onward. I mean, you have these pseudo-prophets that are mixing stuff from Gnosticism and Christianity and claiming to prophesy this or that, or have this or that revelation. And you can count guys like Emanuel Swedenborg or Joseph Smith. I mean, it's really like that, where you've got these people that are making these claims to have almost like this revisionist or expounded take on things that happen in the biblical past, and they're attaching stuff to it, but then they're weaving in their own doctrine and trying to make their leadership a new prophet or kind of a new religious tradition. So I think most of what we have here is probably based around the Maccabees progressively going from Judah is the only one who is called Maccabees. So, even though it's called Maccabees, they're really the Hasmoneans. But the Hasmonean family progressively going from basically just being these guerrilla revolutionaries to then getting the priesthood and then being kings and having an independent state. And the propaganda is just changing, and a lot of these writings that are going to go in with that are going to be probably other people taking advantage of the fact that their library was burned, and these guys are trying to legitimize themselves by having a library with a bunch of writings that kind of add to the Bible or surround the biblical narrative, almost like these are additional details that Bible readers would like to know but they don't have access to, making it look like they're the caretakers of the biblical tradition. When in fact they're not. They got a bunch of bad writings, and that's why all this stuff is rejected by the Babylonian Jews, who are going to eventually produce the Masoretes in the Masoretic text. They're going to reject a lot of this stuff, and you should too. There is nothing in any of these writings that we can conclude is divinely inspired or accurate, and the inaccuracies in it are not minor. Remember, you do have some minor inaccuracies in the Bible, okay? They're not things that necessarily cause contradiction in Scripture, but you're going to have some minor things, because you're going to have things that people are copying from the Septuagint, which is pretty much the standard Greek translation that a lot of them are using. And for instance, Luke is going to copy a Septuagint genealogy, and there's going to be a name in there that should not be in there. It's not in Genesis, it's not in Chronicles, it's not even in Chronicles in the Septuagint, but it's added to the Septuagint version of Genesis, and it really came from the Book of Jubilees. We know this. And the evidence that we have is the Septuagint is not as old as it claims to be. The Septuagint probably came about in this period, after the Book of Jubilees. And the Book of Jubilees seems to come around the 130s, after John Hyrcanus claims to be priest of the Most High God, which is a Melchizedekian title. And First Maccabees, which we're going to go through, seems to be propping up the idea of Judah Maccabeus being kind of the Lion of Judah, and him being kind of the Melchizedek priesthood, and that family line essentially fulfilling these prophecies that were messianic. That seems to be the case. That seems to be what they're trying to develop, and I'm going to show you some changes to Daniel that they make that kind of conform that too. Then the Greek Septuagint seems to be written afterwards, because it's literally around this period where we find the oldest manuscript evidence, and I mean scraps and stuff like that, of what becomes the Septuagint. We don't find anything older than that. And I realize we don't have New Testament stuff that's as old as the New Testament is, but we do have scraps and stuff of the New Testament that go to within a few decades of when it was written. So we know, at least we don't have a whole preserved copy. We have nothing of the Septuagint before this era in scraps or anything. Nor do we have provenance. In other words, we don't see citations of things that are from the Septuagint that are different than the Masoretic text. That's how you would know. If I found writings, for instance, in this era that are citing things that are in the Septuagint but not in the Masoretic text, well, I would know that the Septuagint has to be older than this. But we don't find it. We find things that are consistent with the Masoretic text, and that's Sirach right here. Sirach is going to cite a lot of scriptural stuff, and he certainly cites, this is 180, he does cite an idea that seems to come from the Proverbs, which we would expect individual Jewish books to have been copied into Greek by this time, because the Jews are speaking Greek for at least a couple hundred years. So you would expect some writings to be there, and we find a translation of work that makes wisdom out to be a created being. Because the Hebrew word for, I think it's like brought forth or poured forth the Holy Spirit, can mean begotten. And so begotten can mean it had an origin or was created. And so I think the word is like established or something like that, but that word can be translated to Greek to be created, so there's evidence of that. That's not necessarily evidence of the whole Septuagint. But other than that, everything in it shows no evidence that Jubilees was written at this time based on the stuff that we're going to cover. It shows no evidence that the Septuagint was written at this time. It's just a standalone writing that seems to be, it was originally written in Hebrew and then copied into Greek. And he's probably taking the Hebrew, it's his son in 137. By this time, the Septuagint's written, and he's translating into Greek, and you probably have the Septuagint at this time. But you don't have any evidence of any other distinction than the Septuagint being in it. And it's going to cover a lot of things that are in the Old Testament. So right now we're going to cover those last three books. We're going to cover Sirach and 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And that kind of walks you through the period in which all this stuff is written. So if you were going to study, and again, if I were to do this series all over again, I would start with Sirach and 1st and 2nd Maccabees, so you can kind of get the history down, and then try to understand where those books are going to fit in with that. And I'll go over that whole list at the end. But we're going to start with Sirach because it is certainly the oldest written of these. I have it written probably around between 180 and 190 BCE. So wisdom of Sirach is wisdom literature. It's not trying to claim to be scripture. It's trying to be claimed. It's like commentary. So it's not at all trying to make any supernatural claims, any divine inspiration claims. It really is a book that was written by this guy, Jesus ben Sirach, or Joshua ben Sirach, and it's a writing of his that is based on his reflections on the whole Bible. And so he's writing it similar to the Book of Wisdom, which is going to come a few hundred years later, and similar in style somewhat to the Proverbs. So there's stuff that's kind of like the Proverbs and kind of like the Psalms, and what he's doing is he is kind of reflecting on all that literature and writing a kind of a composite summary of what his takeaway is from the Bible. Well, there's no major false doctrine on it. There are a few errors in it, and there are a few doctrines that are kind of reflective of the age, but there's no major like doctrinal changes to the Bible and stuff like that. And I'm just going to go over these things. So it reflects the second century beliefs of these times, so you can kind of see by it what the Jews were trending towards in this time. Remember, after they come back under Ezra and Nehemiah, they're going to become increasingly anti-Gentile and anti-women. That's just how they are, okay? They look at women and Gentiles as the reason why Israel fell and why they went into captivity and why they lost their glorious kingdom. Because obviously, what does Solomon do? He marries a bunch of Gentile women and they seduce him into idolatry. So it's not a crazy conclusion that they come up with, but it is the wrong conclusion. It's not the one the Bible is teaching them. Okay, it's their own heart that is the problem. It's not Gentiles and women, but they're going to make it Gentiles and women. So in that, they're going to call wisdom, which is the Holy Spirit, a created being. They're going to refer to it as a her. They're going to refer to her children and stuff like that. So that's, again, this is not a new idea that's coming from me. This is stuff that's coming from the Second Temple period. That's how they understood the scriptures. So it's not hard to see at all. You don't have people getting into this idea of the Holy Spirit not being a feminine, and really until it looks like the time around Christ when you have like Philo and stuff like that. But even I was working on translation for 3 John. 3 John actually says one of the names for the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of Truth. And there's actually a term in 3 John where he's talking about this guy that's one of the good elders in Ephesus, and he says he's testified to by all the people there and by the truth herself. So obviously he's referring to the Holy Spirit testifying to this guy being legit and in the truth. Okay. And you could say, well, that's just a figure of speech. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it's a figure of speech that's saying, the doctrine, the true doctrine itself confirms that, because the word truth is a feminine word, and that may be fair. But he's talking about people testifying to this guy. Let me actually just show you guys this right now. So this would be 3 John about to Gaius, the elder at Ephesus, and he says, "I wrote the church, but Diotrephes, who loves the preeminence among them, does not admit them." So this is the bad elder who's not letting them into the church. "Because of this, if I come, I will bring up his deeds, which he does, berating us with evil words. Neither does he receive the brethren, and he prevents those who would, even casting them out of the church. Beloved, do not imitate evil, but good." Now he's saying that's what the bad guy does. Now here's the good guy. "He that does good is from God, and he that does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has been testified to by everyone." Now this is the good guy, okay? And so he's encouraging Gaius to be like Demetrius and not like Diotrephes, okay? And he says, "Demetrius has been testified to by everyone and by the truth herself," okay? So this is John the Apostle speaking and saying, again, your King James is going to translate this the truth itself, but this is what they do because of their masculine bias. If a word is a herself, and this is just what the language is, they're going to say itself. If it's a he or an it, they're going to say he. They just don't want to translate these feminine terms in there. Well, I'm saying this reference to the truth herself is the Holy Spirit. Okay, you could say that's just a figure of truth, figure of speech for the truth, but this is John. This is John who wrote the Gospel of John. The Spirit of truth, again, all the he's in John related to there are terms for the Holy Spirit that definitely the pronoun you would use is a he. So don't think I'm saying they all have to be she's or anything like that. I'm saying that the pronoun in Greek would be an it sometimes, a her sometimes, and a he sometimes. That's the proper translation. But this one is a very clear, the truth herself. Okay? So this is not foreign to the writers of Scripture, and it's much more clear to people who were Aramaic or Jewish speaking, and that's why we find this in the wisdom literature. So anyways, he's going to say that God hates the Samaritans, and he mentions the Shechemites and the Philistines, but basically that God hates the Gentiles in general. They grieve him. He's going to say a few things that insinuate that women aren't to be trusted. He's not totally bashing women, but he is basically like, don't go for good-looking women. Don't look at a good-looking virgin. Like, don't go for a woman who sings. Basically, like, the good women are plain-looking and silent. Like, that's how he's framing it. And he says quite a few things about women here. I'm not going to go over all of them because it's like 137 pages. But if you were to read it, you're gonna see a lot of stuff. And basically, this is the originator of the song. If you want to be happy for the rest of your life, never make a pretty woman your wife, because you can just tell that's his attitude. Okay, the best woman is a quiet woman that's not that good looking, so she will never get you to do anything evil, basically. And then he claims that honoring your parents, which is typically giving your parents tribute or financial care in their old age, atones for sins. And you're going to see this attitude start to creep into the Jewish literature, that giving alms to the poor, this is kind of like a version of that for your parents, causes your sins to be atoned for. Okay, so again, these are common errors in the thinking of that day, but I wouldn't, again, it's not claiming to be scripture, so he's not saying thus saith the Lord on anything. He is just basically giving a whole bunch of advice, and honestly, most of it is good. Most of it is, I would never counsel somebody away from reading this. I would just make sure they understand, like, this guy's taken the scripture. It's basically a guy's commentary from Second Temple era. Okay, he is going to mention Enoch twice, but he shows no evidence of any of the ideas that are in the book of Enoch. He just mentions what's said about him in the Genesis record, which suggests that Enoch was not yet published at this time. He mentions most of the prophets, but for some reason he omits Daniel. I don't know why he doesn't mention Daniel at all. And I'll double check through that. Maybe I missed it. But he does, go through kind of a line of Israel's history, and he mentions Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah, and then the 12 prophets, but he doesn't mention Daniel. So it makes me wonder if books like Daniel and Esther are not solidly in the canon at this time. There's a possibility. Again, this is 200 years after Ezra and Nehemiah, and definitely Daniel is mentioned in Ezekiel, but it's also an Aramaic book, and it might not be for that reason. I mean, it's originally written in Aramaic. It might not be in the canon, or it might not be 100% considered canon by everybody by this time. Obviously, it's in the canon because Jesus cites it, and the apostles are going to cite it heavily, so we don't worry about that. But I'm just saying this is probably, let's say, 200 to 300 years after Daniel is written, and there might be some question, and that's why he doesn't mention it. But we'll see. He just mentions a lot of practical advice that's not even spiritual. One of things like, don't put your elbow on a table when you dine, and he actually says, go throw up. So if you're called to dine and you're not hungry, but you're obligated to eat, he literally is just like, go sneak away during the meal and make yourself throw up. So some of this stuff is just like social courtesy type stuff, which is kind of weird. But again, it's meant to be his practical advice, something he might pass down to his kids. It's like, here's everything I've learned from life in the Bible, basically. And that's what it seems to be. And his grandson is going to translate it in the 130s BCE. So this is around the time of John Hyrcanus' rule. And remember, they're collecting new books for the library from the time it gets destroyed under Antiochus Epiphanes. And so, that's probably when it comes into the more public records, and then those books are going to be distributed to the Greeks in Egypt, and we're going to see the evidence of that in Second Maccabees. So, I'm sorry, this guy actually is from Alexandria, so they might send it to the Maccabees. That might be the case. But again, I don't get any major red flags when I'm reading this. It's just obvious it's not scripture, and it's not, again, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But it says, here, wisdom is created before all things, and understanding of prudence from everlasting. So they see wisdom, and this is just how the Greeks the Greek Jews would have translated the Proverbs. So if you just look at the Septuagint version of the Proverbs, this makes sense. But if wisdom is the Holy Spirit, then wisdom is not a created being. But you're going to find this in everything around the Greek culture of the Alexandrians. Again, he created her, he saw and measured, he poured her out upon all his works. She is with flesh according to his gift. So it's very clear that they see wisdom as the Holy Spirit, but the breath of life, she's poured out, right? But they see her as a created being, okay? Let's see here. Again, he who honors his mother and father makes atonement for his sins. Wisdom exalts her sons. So this is going to be based on Proverbs 3. Jesus is going to cite that wisdom is justified by her children. He's basically saying the same thing. He's not citing this. He's citing Proverbs 3, okay, where she's calling her children to come and, let her counsel them and not go to the prostitute, okay? So the whole book of Proverbs is about not going to the wayward woman, but the woman who is wisdom, okay? And wisdom is referring to her children. Wisdom is their mother. And then by the end of the book, you have the Son of God introduced, and then you have the Proverbs 31 woman introduced, which is supposed to be a wife like the mother. Okay, and so you want to see those as the Holy Spirit and the church being modeled against the Father and the Son. Okay, so it says, humble your soul greatly, for the punishment of the ungodly man is fire and the worm. So I wanted to show you guys this, just to show you that hell, the idea of getting thrown into hell and fire, this stuff is from Isaiah, but it's clear that they believed this in this time. So the idea of going to hell as your final punishment, and the worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched and stuff like that, is not completely novel. When Jesus gets there, it's already pre-existing in this culture a couple hundred years before that. And then he's going to say stuff about women again. Don't associate with a woman who is a singer, lest perhaps you get caught by her tricks. So if she's got a great singing voice, she's just trouble. Let's see. Turn your eye away from a beautiful woman. Don't gaze at another's beauty. Many have been led astray by the beauty of a woman, and with this, passion is kindled like a fire. This is, I don't think this is a deterministic way of thinking, but it says the government of the earth is in the Lord's hand. In due time, he'll raise up over it the right person at the right time. I think this is just the general kind of, we're under the dominion of the Gentiles, and we'll get a good king if the Lord wills, basically. He who builds his house with other men's money is like one who gathers stones for his own tomb. So these guys are very much against usury, so they're against borrowing money to build a house, which is the standard today. That's really interesting that would be considered. If this was scripture, that would say everybody who's taking out a home loan is sinning, basically, or doing something really stupid. Don't be ensnared by a woman's beauty. Don't desire a woman for her beauty. The beginning of all sin came from a woman. Because of her, we all die. Again, what about Adam? He was the one who was given the command. No. Don't give a wicked woman freedom of speech. The fornication of a woman is the lifting up of her eyes. It will be known by her eyelids. So basically, you can just look at a woman's eyes and know if she's fornicated, apparently. A silent woman is the gift of the Lord. If you've been forced to eat, rise up in the middle of it, and you shall have rest. So this is one translation. This is the KJV translation of it. Other translations say, but if you get a stomach ache from eating too much, go off and vomit, and you will feel better. Okay. This is in the context of basically giving you a bunch of etiquette when you're called to dine at somebody else's meal. Okay. So it's actually be like, go act like you're going to go relieve yourself and just go make yourself throw up, and that's what you do, so you don't overeat. Be ashamed in regard of the truth of God and his covenant. These are things you should be ashamed of, okay? Of leaning on your elbow at dinner. So, be ashamed in regard to the truth of God and his covenant, okay? This is the top of his list. These are things you should be ashamed of if you're a covenant-keeping Jew. Of leaning on your elbow at dinner. Of contemptuous behavior in the matter of giving and taking. of silence before those who greet you, of looking at a woman who is a prostitute. So above all these things, he's like leaning on your elbow at dinner. Nobody does that. Only losers do that. So let's see. From the garments come the moth, and from a woman comes woman's wickedness. Better is the wickedness of a man than a pleasant woman. Wow. Better is the wickedness of a man than a pleasant woman. A woman who puts you to shame and disgrace. Okay. Let's see. So I want to show you this one because you want to get in this time, and this is, I'm going to have this in my translation of James because he uses the terms changing shadow and parallax, and those are actually astrological terms. These guys, and this is in Josephus, this is in the Enochian literature, this is in James. They understand when they're talking about signs and seasons, and that the sun, the moon, and the stars were given to us astrologically. Now, I don't mean astrologically like divination. I mean astrologically like there's a logic to how the sun moves and stars move. And that moon is going to go up and go through its phases 12 times as it rises in the night sky against the different constellations because the earth is going around the sun, flat earthers. That's why it does that, okay? If you don't think that, you need to come up with a theory for why all the stars in the heavens rotate, okay? Because it rotates. The moon rises in different parts of the sun. And what you have here is there's 12 cycles where the moon's going to go through its cycle while rising within different parts of the night sky, and that's how they divide it into 12 degrees. And then they take a star pattern within that and say, well, we're going to make that look like a bear. And so that's the month of the bear. And this is how the original calendars were made, because the moon goes up 12 times. Now, there's going to be a little layover, and that's why these people are going to have 360-day calendars, but they're always going to have like leap months or leap days or leap years, okay? I used to think that the calendar was once 360 days, and now it is not. I don't think that anymore. Maybe. I mean, it's possible that these things change. But when the Lord says that God established the foundations of the earth and it will not move, I have to believe that it's not moved since he created it. In terms of its relative location to the stars and everything like that, okay? I don't see evidence of that. Now, we see evidence of, okay, the sun goes backwards here. Well, that's the rotation of the earth, though. So God could slow down its rotation. He makes the sun go backwards in Hezekiah's day. He makes the sun stall for 2 days in Joshua's day. Okay, well, that's the Lord acting supernaturally on the earth to slow down its rotation. It's not him stopping the sun and the stars and all that from moving. So God can do that. He's supernatural. He can do that. Well, anyways, this says the moon marks the changing seasons, declares the time and the signs for the world. From the moon is the sign of feast days and light that wanes when it completes its course. So I just wanted to show you that these guys understood this. This was understood from way back in Babylon, probably from the pre-flood era, because you're talking about guys with nothing on TV but the stars. They're noticing these patterns. These people live long lives and they're noticing these patterns. And every night they're watching the stars. So astrology, we have signs of astrology in Göbekli Tepe. So yes, they turned it into a false religion, but what it was is a logical, coordinated system that shows you how long a year is, how long a month is, and you can measure it by these signs. And all you have to do is create constellations, and that's why you always have 12 of them, and sometimes 13, because sometimes you're going to have a leap year. Anyways, it says a month is called after its name, increasingly wonderfully. It's changing, an instrument of the army on high, shining in the structure of heaven, the beauty of heaven, the glory of the stars, an ornament giving light to the highest places to the Lord. So this is important because you're going to have people who are going to try to get you into Hebrew roots, are going to make the claim that when they use the term moedim, the term for seasons, in Genesis 1, that they're talking about feast days, they're not talking about changing of seasons. I don't believe that's true. There's people who have said because of how the atmosphere was before Noah, they didn't need changing seasons back then. We don't have evidence that is either true or false. That would just be a theory. And the only thing we have is that God says after Noah's flood, he promises Noah that through the end of the world, as long as the world exists, there will be the seasons. So it doesn't mean they didn't exist before that. He's just saying as long as there's a world, there's going to be normal seasons. He's never going to flood the earth again. You're not going to have a catastrophe like this until God destroys the whole world, which he's going to do in the very, very last days. So all I see that is God basically making these promises to them. Does that mean that there was no rain before that? No, I don't think so. Well, there was a dew that rose and fell, and maybe there was a consistency, and they didn't need the annual rains and the snow melt and all that stuff. There's a possibility that there wasn't snow, that it was pretty uniform in temperature, but you would still have, assuming there was no astronomical change, you would still have something like the seasonal pattern, because the seasons are based around planting and sowing and harvesting, which they were doing before the flood. So that's just my assumption, and if anyone has another idea, I just would ask to show me where you got that and what your evidence is. I'd consider it, but that's just my thought on that. So anyways, I just wanted to show you this because this astrological way of looking at the world in terms of measuring signs and seasons is not the same as divination by these signs. Okay, that is astrological cult, and then you have astral deities and cults and gods that come from that. So that's something totally different. So let's see here. So here he mentions Enoch. He just says, Enoch pleased the Lord and was taken up, an example of righteousness to all generations. That's almost exactly what Paul says about him in Hebrews. So both this book that was written 300 years before Hebrews and Hebrews only say the same thing about Enoch, which just shows you that Enoch is not legitimate literature. He established an everlasting covenant with him. He gave him a priesthood of the people. This is talking about the Aaronic priesthood. God did not establish an everlasting priesthood with Aaron. He established an everlasting priesthood with Phinehas, who is a descendant of Aaron, which this guy is going to mention that too. But Phinehas is going to have a descendant that is going to marry into the line of Christ. And that's how that everlasting priesthood is going to be. The Aaronic priesthood is not going to last forever. It never was. He made a covenant with David and the son of Jesse from the tribe of Judah. The inheritance of the king is a loan from son to son. The inheritance of Aaron is also to his seed. So I just want to show you this because this is going to be before the Maccabees try to become kings. And they admit this in their books. They're Levites. They're not of the line of David. They have no right to become kings, and yet they do. Okay, so this is something that was understood before them, that the kingship was supposed to go to David and his descendants forever. You cannot have a legitimate king of Israel outside of the line of David. So the Maccabees were usurpers, and I'm going to show you how they bought their way into being considered royalty. Okay. Again, he's mentioning things throughout the Bible. Didn't the sun go back by his hand and one day become two? So that's talking about Hezekiah's day and then also Joshua's day. He says Ezekiel saw the vision of his glory and of the 12 prophets. And this is what I meant here. He's going through and he's just giving kind of a history of things that God did. And you see Hezekiah, you see David, you see different Samuel and Judges and stuff like that. And then he gets down to Ezekiel and he says Ezekiel saw a vision, and then he says the 12 prophets. Well, between Ezekiel and the 12 prophets, you should have Daniel, and he gives no mention of it. So if I look through his book, Daniel is not mentioned once. And so maybe in where he is, again, this is 200 BCE, roughly, in Alexandria, Egypt. Maybe over there, Daniel's not considered part of the canon yet, because these guys have been speaking not Aramaic for some time, and Daniel was written in Aramaic before it's translated into Greek. So there is a possibility. Remember, the Septuagint, there's no evidence of the Septuagint having been written yet, and if Daniel is in Aramaic, and they've been speaking basically, because you see in Nehemiah talking about all these Jews who are speaking the Egyptian language. Remember, the Greeks would have taken over by this time, and so he might speak Greek, and he might speak that Coptic language, but he might have never learned Aramaic. They might be from generations and generations that have never spoken Aramaic, and Daniel might not be translated into Greek at this time, and so they just don't know it's part of the canon. I don't know. We'll see. But it's mysteriously missing, and he mentions a lot of stuff. Again, he says, no man on earth was created like Enoch, for he was taken up for the earth. That's all he says about him. Okay? So we know Enoch wasn't written at this time. Then he says, this is towards the end of the book, he says, it was Simon, the son of Onias, the high priest, who in his life repaired the house and in his days strengthened the temple. So this is what gives us the hints of when this was written. Simon is the son of Onias. Onias is going to be mentioned in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. He was a famous priest of Israel before the priesthood started to get bought and sold in the political dealings. So he would have been there in the period that transitioned, or that was during the Seleucids, but it would have been before you started to have all the drama with the drama with the Maccabees and all that. So it looks like he would have been priest, and then he was succeeded by his brother in 175. But he was a well-known priest, but he would have been priest all the way back to like 216, 220. And so that's where we get that this was probably written around that time, during the reign of Onias. So he's apparently known for cleaning up and refurbishing and making the temple better, I guess. And you're going to have this over and over and over again, people improving on the temple. It's not necessarily rebuilding it, but they're kind of remodeling it, updating the materials and stuff like that. So that's it. I don't see anything crazy about this book. Again, I would recommend it as a read just to get a good, read on the lay of the land at that time, if you will, theologically. Then he says, with two nations my soul is vexed, and the third is no nation. Okay? With two nations my soul is vexed, and the third is no nation. Now this is where, again, I don't know if he's speaking, now bless the God of all. This is just him, speaking about him, okay? With two nations my soul is vexed, and the third is no nation. Those who sit in the mountain of Samaria, the Philistines, and the foolish people who live in Shechem. Apparently he's like, I don't like those people. Well, how are they affecting you in Egypt? I don't know. We just know Jews don't like Samaritans anymore. Philistines they're not non-existent as a people. They're still cities of the Philistines, and they still have the Temple of Dagon and stuff like that. The Shechemites apparently still exist in Israel by this time. He says, I have written this book in understanding of knowledge. I, Jesus, the son of Sirach, Eleazar of Jerusalem, who out of his heart poured forth wisdom. So he seems to be from Jerusalem. It is his grandson who's not. So again, there's a question there. Why is he not mentioning Daniel when he's mentioning all this stuff? He doesn't mention anything from Daniel. He doesn't mention Daniel by name, nothing, but he mentions a lot of other prophets and a lot of other Bible stuff. He doesn't mention Daniel or Esther at all. So, who knows? We know it's in the Maccabean stuff, and there's not a huge time discrepancy between those, but again, those are writings that probably were not originally written in Hebrew. So they're probably some of the slowest stuff to circulate around as canon, because I think there's a general attitude that if it's not written in Hebrew, it's not canon. And that might be the reason why. So let's see. Then he just gives a prayer at the end of it, and that's pretty much it. Okay. So again, I would recommend reading it, but just put your discernment hat on and saying, you always look for what's being said and what's not being said when you're thinking about these things. Okay. So that's Sirach. The next one we're actually going to do is 2nd Maccabees, because 2nd Maccabees is definitely written before 1st Maccabees, okay? The reason how we can tell this, it's pretty obvious, is you can tell he is writing after Judah Maccabeus has defeated this general Nicanor, and basically there's a point in 1st Maccabees that's going to say, and they had peace for a time after that. But there's going to keep being drama, because first Maccabees is going to take place from around 167 BCE to around 135 BCE. So it's covering like a 35-year period, where 2nd Maccabees is, it's going to cite some stuff from the days of Onias and from the days of Nehemiah and from the days of Jeremiah, but it's really, most of the story is taking place from the beginning of the Maccabean revolt to Judah Maccabeus' victory, and before Judah. He doesn't mention the death of Judah Maccabeus. So you're going to have Judah Maccabeus and his 3 brothers all get murdered eventually. They're not successful in establishing a free kingdom, but John Hyrcanus, who is going to be the grandson of Matthias, so this would be Judah Maccabees' nephew, finally gets a kingdom that is recognized by the nations around them, and then he is going to get an actual independent kingdom, like not a tributary, not a vassal, an actual independent kingdom by around 110 BCE, but he starts ruling in 137 BCE. So you see basically Second Maccabees go up to the point where John is going to take the role. And so what it seems to be is the Chronicle. It's kind of like the Samuel of John Hyrcanus's rule, because even though the other guys are going to be somewhat recognized as rulers, they eventually get murdered because they're really just seen by the Greeks around them as usurpers who are just playing politics with everybody, because that's what they're doing. They're switching sides left and right in this thing in order to maintain their rule. And then it's not until the Greeks fall to the Romans that they really start to have some independent recognition. But that only lasts for like one generation. It's like 40, 50 years, and then they become a Roman client state, and then Rome basically replaces them with the Herods. So it really is a joke. The Maccabean, if you think of, if people look with fondness on the Maccabeans, the Maccabean history as like, this is what we're going for, like the overthrowing of the bad guys and, getting back our liberty and freedom. I mean, again, I corrected a guy in church who basically was saying we're going through a Maccabean period in America and we're ridding America of all evil, and I said that wasn't from God, and I was rebuked as having demons and stuff like that because I had some basic discernment. Like, if you just read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, you would know nobody would want to have a Maccabean period, because it just tells you how they keep switching sides back and forth to try to get other people to recognize their rule, and then they keep getting murdered. So if you're like, hey, we're going through a Maccabean period, yay, like, there's nothing good that happens in their whole dynasty, really. They do grow a kingdom, and I'm going to show you that, how the kingdom grows eventually, but it's not really successful. So anyways, when Judah Maccabees finishes the first initial kind of period of we've taken back Jerusalem and the temple, that's when First Maccabees is written. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to portray it as like, hey, Judah Maccabees has delivered us from the Gentiles. He definitely has not, okay? You just read First Maccabees and you can tell he definitely did not, okay? But this is probably written in that few years that they have some relative peace, because the Greeks at that time are fighting amongst themselves. There's multiple descendants of the Seleucids fighting for the control of the kingdom, and you have them losing basically the whole Asian part of their kingdom to the Parthian Empire. And then the Romans are taking the eastern part of their empire and making client states and allies out of everybody else in Turkey. So really their kingdom is getting whittled down to just Syria, but they're still claiming control of all Judea the whole time. And the Maccabees are actually going to submit to that multiple times, both to the Ptolemies and to the Seleucids. So they didn't really accomplish anything, again, until John Hyrcanus' day. And that is really more a byproduct of basically them becoming a Roman quote-unquote ally, and then the Greeks falling apart. And then as soon as they kind of pledge fealty to the Parthians, that's when the Romans come in and they take over. They're like, no. Romans never help them with anything. But as soon as they make themselves a client state of Parthia, the Romans come and take it over, basically. So they were never free from Rome, because Rome was literally watching their rulers, who they're saying, yeah, we're with you, we're allies and stuff like that, but they never help them as they get killed one after another. They might send a letter, be like, oh, that's really sad. Let me know when you guys got real security there, and then we'll try to set up a base there. So anyways, again, First Maccabees proves Second Maccabees false. It's going to have multiple mythological stories, like a story about Jeremiah taking the temple to some secret cave somewhere and hiding it. And then another one about Nehemiah magically restarting the altar with some goo that was made out of coals from the previous altar before Jerusalem was destroyed. Okay, they're saying these are in the books that Nehemiah had in the library, but they got lost, and then Judah Maccabees found them. So the books that we have that are crazy and incompetent there were things even more crazy and incompetent among the stuff that the Maccabees collected. And there are probably a bunch more, and I would imagine some of these are held by the Essenes and the Qumran caves. Remember, we just have some of the stuff that they had, but they probably had lots of books, and they were making up their own stuff too. Telling Jews to come back from abroad, you're going to find out that I think it's Jonathan, which is Judah Maccabeus' brother, either him or Simon, kind of gives a big bribe to the Romans to basically give themselves the authority to extradite Jews who are in foreign countries in the Roman dominion and breaking the law. And so that's why you have, you find this going all the way back to the Maccabees. That's why you have the priesthood in Paul's day. See, you're probably wondering, how are these Jews from Jerusalem able to send Paul to Damascus to arrest Jews in Damascus for following Christ? And the answer is because the Maccabees bought that from Rome. They paid him with a 1,000-pound gold shield to say, here's a big, huge pile of gold to allow us the authority to arrest Jews who we feel are not keeping the law. So, yeah, Maccabees, yay Maccabees, right? We want that, right? And then we're going to get to First Maccabees. Again, this is written to support Jonathan Hyrcanus' rule, and the reason is because he's not legitimately a ruler or a king. They're not legitimately even supposed to be high priests. Matthias was a priest, but their line was never the high priest, and that's why some people think the Essenes are probably people who might have been from the legitimate priesthood. They're not sure because the priesthood's getting bought and sold for a time before this. Onias seems to be the last legitimate priest, and then after him you start to get the drama that goes on that leads to the Abomination of Desolation. Also in 2nd Maccabees, which is written 25 to 30 years before 1st Maccabees, you have no mention of an Abomination of Desolation. Also, in neither one of these books do you have any mention of the Hanukkah miracle. It just didn't happen, and I'm going to show you what they write. It's clear it didn't happen, and that was something that was made up afterwards, okay? You do have 8 days of dedication that they're going to celebrate the rededication of the temple, but there's nothing about a miracle or oil. The temple needed to be cleansed for 8 days. There's nothing like that. They're just going to do like a second kind of Feast of Tabernacles, to honor the time they spent in tents fighting guerrilla warfare, basically. So it's like they're doing a second Feast of Tabernacles. And they're going to do it for 8 days, and then that's it. You're going to ask, well, why wouldn't they do it for 7 days? Well, because if they did it for 7 days, well, then they might be packing up on the Sabbath. So they have to start it on first day of the week, end it on the first day of the week, the 8th day. So that's where Hanukkah comes from. Again, it's not based on a Hanukkah miracle. It's based on like a second Feast of Tabernacles to honor the fact that the Maccabees were in tents and fighting guerrilla warfare. It's going to make a number of connections, and they're subtle. Only one of them it actually cites a prophecy being fulfilled, and that's Psalm 79. We'll show you that in a bit. But it's going to cite stuff from Daniel and Jeremiah and Micah about him fighting in Basra, about the Abomination of Desolation. And it's very clearly trying to make it look like Judah Maccabeus was a Messiah figure. And then, remember, this is written in the days of Jonathan Hyrcanus, and he's setting them up as the priest of the Most High God, or the Melchizedek priesthood. And that's where you have the idea of two Messiahs coming from. You have Jonathan Hyrcanus trying to make it look like Judah was the first Messiah that died, and he's the second Messiah. Okay? So this is not a legitimate Jewish translation. It's propaganda for Jonathan Hyrcanus's fake millennial kingdom, basically, which falls apart immediately. I don't know why people don't put these things together. I've never heard this before. I'm just reading them and just using what seems like common sense to me. Maybe because these guys have never watched any like political drama and realize how people make propaganda and lie. Maybe. I don't know. So anyways, after that, at the end of this, I'm going to get you through what I feel like is the actual order of all these books that we've covered in this series, and then I'm going to slap this in the playlist, and we're going to call it quits on this for now. And I'm going to probably start teaching on the New Testament alongside the Old Testament. But that's it. So let's go look at 1st and 2nd Maccabees now. So 2nd Maccabees again first. again, he's going to tell these stories, and here's a story of Nehemiah, which is just weird. Now, this is just what he's doing is he's writing to the Jews, and he's writing from Jerusalem to the Jews throughout Egypt. Okay, remember, there have been Jews throughout Egypt since really the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, and what they're trying to do is say, hey, Jews throughout Egypt, we just want you to know that we've got control of the temple again. Start coming. I don't know if he's just soliciting them to move back to Israel or to start coming to the temple for the temple sacrifices again. My guess would be it's the latter. But it's saying in the 404 year, the people were at Jerusalem and Judea. Okay, so he's starting to say, here's what went down. Here's what happened, okay? So what you probably have is Jews doing a pilgrimage to the temple for the feast, and then they stop doing it because the temple gets sacked and ransacked, and the libraries burned. And apparently there's a statue of Jupiter set up in the temple, and there is pigs being they're basically doing pagan sacrifices on the altar of pigs. So when people say Antiochus Epiphanes put up a statue of himself, not true. Antiochus Epiphanes doesn't go to Jerusalem once during this thing. Maybe once. I might be mistaken. But most of the time he's dealing with stuff up in Persia, and he's just got a general going down around there. And there's going to be one period of time that he goes and trashes the temple, and it says that they're forcing the Jews to not keep the law, and if they try to keep the law, they're going to torture them and kill them. This seems to be insinuated that it's true in the book of Hebrews. Because when it talks about people being tortured rather than give up their faith, we don't have records of that in the Old Testament outside of Maccabees. So I would assume Hebrews is supporting that this is a true story. And what basically you have is they're trying to make them eat swine's flesh. They're saying if they get circumcised, it's a death penalty. And there's a story about these women who circumcise their babies, and they find out, and they kill their babies and hang them on their necks and make them walk around with their dead babies, showing what they did and why their kids are dead. So again, he's talking to them. He's kind of giving them the backstory that leads up to this, and he starts out with this thing. And if you guys wonder where the Nephi from your Book of Mormon comes from, it comes from this. Okay, it says what it is a name for this weird mystical water, and this could be Greek fire or something. I don't know what it is, but what they're claiming, this is their claim, their mystical claim, is that when the altar, or before the temple was destroyed, Jeremiah told them to go bury some coals from the altar. And Nehemiah knew where they were buried, and so he had these guys go and dig them up. Now, right here, this just sounds like bullcrap. But anyways, he has them dig them up, and it's just this like thick water, which kind of sounds like it might be like Greek fire or oil or something like that. But it sounds like Greek fire. And he takes this water, apparently, that they're claiming is a transmorphed version of the coals that they had buried, and they spread it on the logs, and it just starts the fire back up. So it's kind of this weird, absurd thing that, I mean, first of all, why? Because there's supposed to be a perpetual daily sacrifice, which means that fire is never supposed to go out. Well, that is true, and it is a shame that the fire went out because the Jews sinned so much. But they're making up this weird story that the fire turned to, the burning coals turned to water, and then the water apparently turned to Greek fire, and the Greek fire basically restarted the new thing. Okay? Why? So they can make some religious claim that this is sacred fire and it's never gone out. That would be my guess. Anyways, whatever the goo was that they put in the logs, he's saying Nehemiah calls this thing Naphthar, which is much to say a cleansing, but many call it Nephi. Nephi, okay? So if you were to look up Nephi, you're going to find that associated with Mormonism. And I think it might be the plates that Joseph Smith has are called, one of them is called Nephi. Oh, no, that's the name. That's the name of one of the sons who apparently they go watch the Book of Mormon movie. It's great. They build the Santa Maria in like ancient Babylon. They just sail to America in it because of reasons. And then one of them becomes Native Americans because he turns red because he's evil. And that's where it's just a racist cult. Like, it's awesome. So anyways, after this, he's going to tell you the story about how Jeremiah, that this is in the books that they have, that Jeremiah went and hid the tabernacle in some cave but didn't tell anywhere where it was, and God covered it up, so it's a secret. You can't really figure it out. And what they're doing is they're basically saying, we've got these extra books. This is what he's saying all this stuff to say. We've got all these extra books about the full details of the stuff that you don't know from the Bible. And of course, it's just fanciful nonsense. Well, this is why I believe that all these Tobit and Judith and these stupid stories and these additions to Manasseh and all this stuff are popping up in this day. I'm not just theorizing that from nothing. I'm theorizing that from what the author of 2 Maccabees is saying. Because what he's saying is that Nehemiah had this library that was destroyed, and Judah regathered it after he got the temple back. And I'm going, yeah, I think they burned the records you had, and people saw an opportunity to sell you bullcrap in exchange for the real stuff, because there's nothing legitimate about the Maccabees. There's just nothing legitimate about their rule. You can tell it's like a faction within Judea that supports them. It's a faction of people, and they're basically like a terrorist group. You could say they're freedom fighters, fine, you could say that, but there's nothing about them having the general support of all of Israel. If you look at their kingdom, even by the time, I'm going to show you how small it is. This is after the Hasmonean revolt. This is their territory, and they don't really have it. They're not even in Jerusalem. They don't ever until they buy the priesthood. They don't ever have a base in Jerusalem. And once they buy the priesthood, obviously now they're working for the priesthood. But even in the days of like Jonathan and Simon, they build up a fortified city up here in around Gibeah, so around where Saul's city was. But they don't have their main base or any kind of main city in Israel. And then they eventually buy the governorship from Ptolemy, and then they lose it and they buy it. And I'll go through all this. They're gonna try to bribe their way into being considered kings of Israel over a semi-sovereign vassal territory for about 30 years before the Greeks kind of fall apart, and then they kind of get it by default, because by this time they've convinced the people that the Romans and the Greeks and the Spartans and everybody else thinks we're the king. So we're the king. It's just corrupt, everything they do. But I just want to show you this. Under Judah Maccabees, this is as big as it is. And again, all this means is this is to the extent where they're fighting, taking cities, killing people and stuff like that. But they don't have control or sovereignty. They don't have complete control. They don't have legitimacy. They don't have sovereignty. And then Jonathan buys the priesthood from another guy who gets deposed. It's literally like a Ptolemaic guy who goes in up and takes over, I forget, Ptolemais or something like that. It's a city in Phoenicia. And then these guys start fighting, and they're just like, hey, here's a bunch of money. Can we be the high priest? And that guy's like, sure. And then he dies like a year later. And then they go back to the next guy, and they're like, hey, we'll fight for you guys if we can be the priest and the king. And you can just read this in 1 Maccabees. They literally just keep whoever's in power, even though these guys are all frenemies and enemies, they keep trying to bribe their way into being considered the king when they're not. And that's why the Greeks keep betraying them, because the Greeks are just like, you'll say this to our enemy, and you'll say, hey, here's some money, can you recognize me as the king? And then you'll fight against them, against us. So what do? Is they keep betraying them back and killing them. And it happens for 3 generations before John Hyrcanus. I mean, to all 3 of the sons of Matthias, so Judah Maccabee and his 2 brothers, Simon and Jonathan. Okay, it's really ridiculous. It's like here's their line. Here's Matthias, who gets this whole revolt started, and you see he's going to die, and then Judah's going to succeed him 6 years later, and then he's going to die. His brother's going to die. His other brother is going to die, but not until 135. Jonathan's going to die in 142. So over the course of 18 years, they all get murdered. Why? Because they're usurpers. They're a terrorist group that it's like Hamas or Hezbollah. They're like, we'll deal with you because you're going to keep fighting us, and there's no other government, because they're doing exactly 100% what Hamas is doing in Gaza right now, which is basically like forcing people to get circumcised, killing non-Jews, driving them out, trying to force people to submit to their rule, while bribing these foreign kings to recognize their rulership. That's what they're doing. And yes, they're fighting against the Seleucids, but it's not this unified thing like everyone's for these guys. You got to remember, most of the Greeks, or most of the Jews by this time, are Hellenists. They don't care about this. They don't care about the temple. And then John Hyrcanus by 134. Remember, it starts in 167. So 32 years later, John Hyrcanus. By this time, the Greek, the Seleucid, it's really just Syria, has fallen apart. Like their empire is just totally dissolving by this time. And then he's just kind of there by default, and he's like, "Yep, I'm the priest of the most high God, like the Melchizedek priesthood." It's a joke. So, let's see. The weird fire. Oh, this is contained in the same writing, so they're talking about other weird books they have. That the prophet, being warned of God, commanded the tabernacle and the ark to go with him as he went up in the mountain where Moses climbed up and saw the heritage of God. So they're claiming that Jeremiah went up to the mountain that Moses was buried on, where he looked down on Jerusalem and then died. Well, probably bullcrap, because it would be in the Bible if there was something that significant as God warning Jeremiah to do something, because Jeremiah wrote books after Jerusalem was destroyed. And I think he'd mentioned that. Also, we know from the book of Revelation, we know where the ark is. The ark is not on earth. The ark is in heaven. It tells you that the ark's in heaven. When the temple in heaven is opened up, we see the Ark of the Covenant. Why? Apparently God took it at some point in time. Could this be this? It could be. But the fact that there's no mention of that in Scripture, Old or New Testament, seems a little bit absurd. The fact that there's no mention of it in any other literature that came after this seems a little bit absurd. So what else here? Let's see. So this is the same things were also reported in the writings and the commentaries of Nehemiah, and how the founding of the library gathered together the Acts of the Kings and the Prophets and of David and the epistles and the kings concerning the holy gifts. Okay? So they're saying there's all these other letters and all these other books about things that the kings and the prophets and all this stuff did, aside from what we have in the canon. And he says, in like manner, Judas also gathered all these things that were lost by reason of the war we had, and they remain us. He says, wherefore, if you need thereof, send some to fetch them unto you. Now, if these are writings that they had had since the time of Nehemiah, let's think about this, you guys. Nehemiah is like 200, no, I'm sorry. Temple was destroyed in 587. They go back around 550. By 518, the temple is fully rebuilt, and Nehemiah is then going to be rebuilding the walls by 444. Okay? So these are writings that Nehemiah had in 444. Why would they need to be getting them from the Maccabees almost 300 years later? Think about that. No. This is 300 years later. Why would they need to be fetching these writings that they have, that Nehemiah had in his library 300 years later? Wouldn't those writings all have been copied and distributed by this time? 300 years? I would think anyone of means would have copies of these writings at this time. And the answer is because they're not really from Nehemiah. This is the made-up crap that they're pulling together, and this is where I think a lot of your Apocrypha come from. So... What they're going to tell, this guy is going to give the backstory about what leads to the Abomination of Desolation, or what First Maccabees calls the Abomination of Desolation. Because in First Maccabees, First Maccabees is just going to start with the Abomination of Desolation, because it's really about Judah Maccabees and why Matthias and his sons rise up. And so when you see this, we're on page 4. He's just saying, here's when they set up the Abomination of Desolation. They call it the Abomination of Desolation. Second Maccabees is not, because Second Maccabees is not really trying to... they're trying to say that they've been set free from the Gentiles, and it seems to be telling the Jews of Egypt it's okay to come up to the temple sacrifices again. That seems to be what it is. But Second Maccabees is trying to make it sound more spiritual and fulfillment of prophecy like. And so he talks about how basically this is about how Antiochus Epiphanes, this is all happens in history, he is going to get taken captive by the Romans because he tries to this is for something else that he takes him captive for, and I don't remember exactly what it is, but he's basically a hostage. I think it has to do with when his dad was king, and it was something that they did because the Romans and the Greeks are starting to fight at this time, and they are forming allies with the enemies of the Greeks or people that were their subjects, and starting to pick apart their kingdom. And what happens is you have these things where this is a common practice. You'll find this in the Bible. You'll find it in the days of Josiah and stuff like this, where you send your kids to them as like they're going to take care of them. They're not going to abuse them or anything, but they're essentially hostages to make sure that we have an accord that you guys are going to do what we want to politically. And that's what happens with Antiochus' father, and Antiochus is one of those. And he gets sneaked out by the king of, where Satan's throne is? Not Laodicea. I can't remember, Sardis or whatever it is, where Satan's throne is. That king helps him to get back to Syria, and he gets back to Syria, and he claims the throne, and he's going to go and he's going to try to invade Egypt, and he gets his army, and he starts to invade Egypt, and then the Romans show up, and that's when they do the whole he's actually starting to invade eastern Egypt, and then the Roman ambassador shows up and draws a circle around him, and he says, first he just says, do you want to fight the Romans? And he was just like, let me think about it. In other words, let me see if I can fight the Romans. And the guy says, no. And he draws a circle around him. This is just an ambassador who does this. He says, let me rephrase that. If you step out this circle without giving us an answer, you're at war with the Romans. And he punks out. The Romans punk him out. Well, within that context, what you have is all the Jews are looking at this stuff going on, and everything that's going on is lockstep prophesied in Daniel 11. And in Daniel 11, after the Antichrist goes down into Egypt, which they think Antiochus Epiphanes is, this is the Jews are going to start to think this and revolt, okay? Because according to Daniel 11, when he goes down to Egypt, he comes back up, he plants his tent or his tabernacle between the sea and the holy mountain, which is where Antiochus would be when he's dealing with the Romans. And it says he comes to his end and no one will help him. Okay? So what the prophecy seems to be indicating, if this was all about Antiochus Epiphanes, and almost everything that happens to this point seems to be about Antiochus Epiphanes, and that's why they're calling what he does the Abomination of Desolation. Based on what they see in the prophecy, it seems like Antiochus Epiphanes should be dead right now and his kingdom falling apart. And so what you have go on here is you have in the generation before that, somebody had paid off Antiochus, or might have been Antiochus himself, paid him off and bought the priesthood, basically, from him. And then somebody else who was outed from the priesthood tries to revolt against that guy and overthrow him. This is not the Maccabees. This is before the Maccabees. And so what happens is you have Jews who think this is it. This is when the resurrection, because I mean, if they're following Daniel's prophecy as a pattern, they're saying this guy's going to die and we're going to have a time of great tribulation for about 3.5 years. That's what it seems like. And then after that 3.5 years, the resurrection's going to happen, the Messiah, blah, 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 everything, right? So they're literally trying to fulfill the vision by themselves. They're trying to take matters in their own hands, just like the Jews are doing now. Well, Antiochus is not dead. Shoot. And these guys have basically, this is before the Maccabees, these guys have started a civil sedition, essentially. And Antiochus comes back, and he finds out there's a sedition going on with the Jews. He's not anti-Jew before this. He's not anti-Judaism before this. What he's anti is, I just got punked out by the Romans, and these Jews, because they thought I was dead, are trying to have a civil revolt and overthrow me. Now, this is not a majority at this time. This is a minority. This is a small group like the Maccabees, but it's before the Maccabees. And so because of what they do, he gets ticked off, and he comes back and he outlaws Judaism. And you talk about they compelling the king by the law, or being compelled by the king by the law to taste swine's flesh. It says they besought him to bring flesh of his own provisions, such as was lawful for him to use. Oh, I'm sorry. So, it says, not long after this, the king sent an old man from Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers. So it's not Antiochus doing this. It's his orders. But Antiochus is never setting up an idol of himself. These are Jewish myths that come afterwards. The whole Hanukkah story and all this stuff. These are Jewish myths. Antiochus did not slaughter a pig on the altar. He sends a guy from Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live according to the law of God. Why? Because they just revolted against him based on a Bible prophecy. That's why. And he said to pollute the temple in Jerusalem and call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, so Zeus, and that in Gerizim. So remember, they already have that second temple in Gerizim of Jupiter, defender of the strangers, as they did desire to dwell in that place. So they basically convert both the temple in Jerusalem and the temple in Gerizim, the Samaritan temple, into temples to Jupiter. And then it says, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles. It doesn't say which temple, but it says who dallied with harlots and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places. Notice it's saying within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought things that were not lawful. And the altar was filled with profane things which the law forbiddeth. And remember, this was written before First Maccabees by like 30 years. They don't mention a statue. They don't mention anything being set in the Holy of Holies. What they just mentioned is that they claim the temples as temples to Jupiter, both the Samaritan and the Jewish one. And in one of these temples, they were carrying on Greek temple prostitution and stuff like that. It doesn't even say which one, but one of them it happens, okay? And it just says the altar was filled with profane things as the law forbids. And of course, we know that is swine's flesh. So there was a pig sacrificed on the altar because they were trying to force people to eat from the altar. And that's what it says here. It says they were trying to sneak in things that were lawful for them to eat, because it's just like the Christians being forced to give a pinch of to Caesar. They're trying to force the Jews to comply and eat stuff that's sacrificed to Jupiter, which is pig. Remember, from This goes back to Pythagoreanism. Pythagoras is going to write in his writings that you should never sacrifice a lamb, and if you're going to sacrifice anything, you should sacrifice a pig. This is why the Greeks are sacrificing pigs. Goes back to Pythagoras. And they're trying to get the Jews to eat it, and the Jews are trying to sneak kosher meats in, essentially, to act like they're doing it, but not doing it, just like the Christians were trying to forge like they gave a pinch to Caesar when they weren't. Okay? But there's a story here, and seems to be the one that Hebrews is going to cite, that a woman with seven brethren, or seven sons of a mother, were tried to be compelled to eat swine's flesh, and none of them were, and so they whipped them and scourged them and killed them. And it just goes through how they did it one after the other, and they're trying to get them to save their lives, but they won't because they're so brave. And this seems to be what Hebrews is citing when it talks about people who were rather face torture than to break the law or whatever. So the mother is apparently a famous mother because of her courage, because she encouraged the boys to face death rather than do it, which is pretty noble considering a lot of other Jews are trying to fake it by bringing in kosher meats. So the whole point of not worshiping other gods is not to make it look to them like you're worshiping, but not worship in your heart. It's to not worship other gods and make them know that you're not worshiping other gods. But so this is again, the Bible would count this as legitimate history. This really happened. We don't have a problem with that story there. And it basically is talking about these kids trusting, these sons of this mother, trusting in the resurrection. So we know whoever believes in 2nd Maccabees is alluding to the resurrection of the dead multiple times. 1st Maccabees doesn't account this. So think about that. Then it's going to talk about this battle. This is kind of weird here. This is Judah Maccabees. It's after these tortures and stuff like this that Matthias starts to go on his rampage. Now Matthias is a Levitical priest, and what it's saying is that he's not going on a rampage against the Greeks. He's not going to fight them. What he is doing is they are attacking Jews who are complying. That's what they start out by doing. And so it's not like they start violating the temple and immediately Matthias is like, let's do this, okay? It's like Jews are starting to comply and they're starting to set up temples and sacrifices to Zeus all over, and the Jews are eating these temple sacrifices, and Matthias is like, let's start killing these Jews who are doing this. That's what he's doing, okay? So these are these are very much more like Islamic terrorists than they are like, godly Jews who are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And he is going to do this for like 6 years, and then he is going to pass the baton to Judah Maccabees and tell his brothers follow him. Keep doing it. And what they're doing is they're going around circumcising Jews by force and killing people who they see violating the law. That's what they're doing. Because remember, under Ezra, the priesthood did get civil jurisdiction to punish people with confiscation of property or even up to death for violating the law. And up until this point, remember, it's the Jews revolting against a priest who bought his priesthood from Antiochus. Okay? Antiochus is mostly leaving alone. They're paying taxes and stuff and land and stuff like that, but he's not messing with their temple sacrifices until they overthrow a high priest that bought the office from him. And that's when he's like, go violate their crap. Screw those guys. And Matthias, what he's doing is he is trying to exercise the authority that the priesthood has over the people of the land that was given to them by the Persians, which the Persians aren't in charge anymore. And so in that context, Judah Maccabeus is going to encourage them, and he's going to say, moreover, he recounted to them what help their forefathers found and how they were delivered when under Sennacherib 185,000 perished. So that's the angel destroying the army of Sennacherib in Hezekiah's day. And then it tells this other story, and he says, and he told them of the battle that they had in Babylon with the Galatians, how they came with but 8,000 in all to the business with 4,000 Macedonians, and that the Macedonians, being perplexed, the 8,000 destroyed 120,000 because of the help they had got from heaven, so received a great booty. So I have no idea what this is. What it seems like is that this is a battle. It's saying they had in Babylon with the Galatians. And I have no idea what this is. The only thing I can guess is possibly because when Nebuchadnezzar had the kingdom in Babylon, he would have ruled the Assyrian part in Eurasia, and Galatia would be north of that. And he may have teamed up with the Macedonians to attack the Galatians and sent a Jewish contingent force to do that. I don't have a historical record of this. If somebody has a comment on that, I'd love to hear it. But this is what Judah Maccabees is recounting them, along with the story of Hezekiah, about how these 8,000 Jews, along with 4,000 Macedonians, so 12,000, beat 120,000 Galatians. That seems like bullcrap. I don't see Galatia ever mounting a 120,000 strong army. It doesn't seem to be a strong enough or unified enough people group or kingdom ever. So it could be a BS story. But this is what he's recounting to them. Who can know? But he's telling them these stories to encourage them. But what Judah eventually ends up doing is getting them to the point that they liberate the temple. Well, I'm sorry. So the Maccabees basically are fighting a guerrilla war. They haven't liberated the temple yet. They're just running around the countryside. They're dwelling in tents, and they're doing guerrilla raids, and then they're attacking Jews who won't comply, who who do comply with Antiochus's decree. Okay, and at that time, Antiochus is trying to fight in Persia. Why? Because the Parthian Empire is starting to rise up, and they're starting to take his empire in the east. This is pretty new at this time. I think it starts around I think it starts around the 170s, or their kingdom. Let's see when this begins. So the kingdom of Parthia starts in 247 BC. So we're looking at 80 years earlier. And it starts way over here. And by this time, they're starting to take over this stuff in the east, and Antiochus is trying to fight them and put down the revolts, essentially, and reclaim it from the Parthians. And he's losing. And the Jews have this story about how he tried to defile a temple of the Persians, because they don't really know that much about the Parthians. They're not a major power that's recognized by them until the Romans recognize them as their main rival in the Middle East. And so all they know is he's out in Persia, and he did something. He was going to rob a temple, and he got struck with a disease for doing that. And they see this as God taking revenge on him for what he's doing on the Jews. What's really going on is he's just losing to the Parthians. And basically he gets sick, and according to them, he gets sick, and as he's dying, this is their propaganda. It's like they have two different propaganda stories. It's like one when Judah Maccabeus wins against Nicanor, but then Judah's going to die and all his brothers are going to get murdered. And then the next guy kind of gets it back again, and so they're going to write a better story. And they're going to leave out all this stuff that's in Second Maccabees, because it's clearly two competing propaganda narratives of why, the Maccabees are in charge. And the first one didn't hold water because all the guys who supposedly won the kingdom back got murdered and did a lot of bribery to try to keep power. So they're going to come up with a better one, and they're just going to leave out all this stuff. But in this one, they claim they always have these fake letters. I don't believe this is real. I mean, they have multiple fake letters from the Greeks in here. This is claiming that Antiochus Epiphanes, because he got so sick, he recognized that God was punishing him for what he did to the Jews, and he was going to become a Jew and give them all kinds of money and give them everything they need for the sacrifices and make them free from tribute and everything that the Persians were doing for them. I think this is bullcrap. I do not think this is a real letter that came from Antiochus Epiphanes, but they're going to have 3 letters of this, between First and Second Maccabees. So he says, but the Lord God Almighty, the plague of Israel, smote him with an incurable and invisible plague. So it's an incurable and an invisible plague. Isn't that interesting? How is he dying? I don't know. We know he died, and we know Daniel says the Antichrist dies without hands, so they're like, well, we're going to give him an invisible or an incurable plague. How did Antiochus Epiphanes die? I don't know. So all we know from contemporary sources that he gets sick and dies. This guy Polybius apparently records it. So I would assume that's a story that's going around that time. He was going to raise money from the Persians to try to maintain his empire and stuff like that, and he dies. But the Jews say, no, he dies because he knew God struck him for what he did. He sent this letter to us telling us that he admitted that. And that he wanted to become a Jew. I think this is a lot of bullcrap. I think this is propaganda, and the reason that's not in First Maccabees is because they were like, that doesn't hold water. Let's come up with a better story than that. So then he says, so after that, after he falls, before he dies, he's going to send this guy Nicanor. Okay, the story is going to kind of double back a couple times. Before he dies, he's going to send this guy Nicanor, and Nicanor is like his main general. Now, First Maccabees mentions 3 generals. They're just going to mention this Nicanor, and basically the Judah Maccabees and his brothers are going to get to the point where they cleanse the temple. And it says, and striking stones, they took fire out of them and offered sacrifice after 2 years. and set forth incense and lights and showbread. Okay? Now, here, notice it says 2 years. I did the math on First Maccabees, and it's going to say a little over 3 years. Why? This is very simple. How long is the Abomination of Desolation? 70 times 7 times, or it's three and a half times. Okay, so if you do 360-day years, so 360 times 3.5 divided by it's a little less than 3.5 years. Well, they extend it to 3 years and like 20 days. But it's close to 3.5 years. It's more than 3 years. This says 2 years. Well, they're not trying to convince you that this is the Abomination of Desolation. They're just trying to tell you that it's free now, okay? And it says how they kept the 8 days with gladness. So it says the same day that the strangers... It says, now upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again. So I don't know why he's saying this, because it makes it sound like they just profaned the temple one day. So I don't know why he's saying this. But it's saying, all that crazy temple stuff might have been going on in the Samaritan temple and not this one. I don't know. But it says the 25th day of the same month, which is Caslu, so that this is where Hanukkah comes from. And it says, and they kept the 8 days with gladness as the Feast of Tabernacles. This is what the original story is. There's not long afore they had held the Feast of Tabernacles. So they kept 8 days like the Feast of Tabernacles when they wandered in the mountains and dens like beasts. What are they doing? They're memorializing the past 2 years that the Maccabees are wandering around in dens and mountains like beasts because they're fighting guerrilla war. That's what they're doing. They're doing a second Feast of Tabernacles. And then they said they ordained a common statute and decree that every year those should be kept of the whole nation of the Jews. So once they take back the temple, they're saying, we want you to do another Feast of Tabernacles in December to honor the 2 years that we spent in the wilderness fighting so that we could get the temple free again. And obviously the Jews are like, yeah, we'll give them that. I mean, they did liberate us, the temple, right? But notice there's nothing about oil or the lamp or any weird thing or it taking 8 days to cleanse the temple. It says, on the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again. It doesn't say they took 8 days to clean the temple. It says it is cleansed on the same day. So the whole Hanukkah legend is bullcrap. Yes, there is an 8-day feast here, but that 8-day feast is a memorial. Remember, this was written first. This was written before the Jews are even fully free. This is written probably within a year of this happening. So I would assume this is the better story. And he's saying they held the feast, and they bare branches and fair boughs and palms and sang psalms unto them that had given good success in cleansing this place. Boy, that sounds kind of like what they're doing when Jesus comes to Jerusalem. And they ordained by common statute the decree, and this was the end of Antiochus called Epiphanes. So basically they're saying as Antiochus Epiphanes, they defeat Nicanor, and, or no, I think they're actually going to fight Nicanor after this. Antiochus is dying. This is what they're doing. And they're trying to make it sound that way. Now his son Antiochus is going to send Nicanor. And there's going to be a couple of... What you do is you have rivalries for the throne of his kingdom nonstop after this. And so you have another Antiochus, and then this Timotheus, who is coming to try to take the Jews by force. And it said the battle waxed strong, and these guys, whoever are writing this, are trying to make it sound like God is helping them supernaturally. So this Timotheus is basically fighting against Judah Maccabees, and it says, when the battle waxed strong, there appeared unto the enemies from heaven 5 comely men upon horses with bridles of gold, and 2 of them led the Jews. So these are supposed to be like angelic warriors or whatever. And took Maccabeus betwixt them, and covered him on every side with weapons, and kept him safe, but shot arrows and lightnings against all the enemies. So being confounded with blindness and full of trouble, they were killed. So what they're trying to make it look like is Antiochus or Judah Maccabees had two angels fighting for him. Then why isn't this in First Maccabees? And the answer is because whoever these guys are is they're not Sadducees, and they actually believe in angels and stuff. And you're going to find multiple stories. Oh, this all starts with a story about a guy in the days of the earlier Greeks, in the days of Onias or before him, who tries to get a big chunk of money that's saved in the temple for widows and orphans, and an angel strikes him and like beats the crap out of him. So these guys clearly believe in angels. The other guys who write First Maccabees do not. So people think these might be like Pharisee and Sadducee versions. And then the Maccabees are Sadducees and they take over. The Pharisees and Essenes seem to be out by that time. So anyways, these supernatural angels are helping Judah Maccabees, and then it says, not long after this, Lysias, the king's protector and cousin, who also managed the affairs, took sore displeasure in the things that were done. So what we're finding is warring among the Greeks, different Greeks and different Greek kingdoms. So this would be whoever Timothy or Antiochus' cousin is. And he says, thus they marched forward in their armor, having a helper from heaven. So they had a divine angel helping them. Lysias fled away shamefully, considering the Hebrews could not be overcome. The Almighty God helped them. He presented them, persuaded to agree all reasonable conditions, and promised that he would persuade the king that he must needs be friends to him. So what they're claiming is that this general or whatever is convinced that God is helping them because he's seeing this angel, and it's making his troops go blind, and that's why he's going to convince the Greeks not to mess with them anymore. Remember, this is all written before they end up killing Judah Maccabeus, because he's going to die apparently not long after this is written. And these were letters written to the Jews from Lysias to this effect. Lysias to the people of the Jews, send greeting. And again, he's going to send another one that, we determined to restore to them their temple, that they may live according to the customs of their forefathers. Wait a minute, I thought they had their temple back. Do you see how this doesn't add up? This story just keeps getting weirder and weirder. I thought they had their temple back. Well, no. They came in, purged the people, and restarted the temple sacrifices. And when you put the two stories together, you're going to figure out what's going on. They don't control Jerusalem. They came in and cleansed the temple of the pagan sacrifices and got the Jewish sacrifices restarted. But the Greeks still control everything. And so the Greeks are going to come right back there, and basically he comes back to them and says, if you guys don't give up Judah Maccabeus to us, we're going to come back here and destroy your temple. That's really what's going on, and that's going to be in First Maccabees. But here they're saying this guy is convinced of the angels and all the stuff, and remember, this is before Judah Maccabeus gets it. He just is going to send letters to the Greeks, and the Greeks are sending letters to the Jews that the temple is theirs, and we were stupid to mess with them because obviously God's on their side. And then he's going to say all the Jews should use their own kind of meats as they did before. And then the Romans sent to them a letter. Okay, now this is a totally different story than Second Maccabees. Like, you can't even reconcile these two. The battles are different, the politics are different, everything that's going on is different, and they're both claiming to have these letters from the Romans and the Greeks and the Spartans and these other people that are confirming different things, and none of this stuff agrees. So these are two different propaganda myths that are competing for what really happened. The Romans sent to them a letter containing these words: Quintus Memmius and Titus Manilius, ambassadors of the Romans, send greeting to the people of the Jews. Whatsoever Lysias the king cousin hath granted, wherewith we are also well pleased. So basically the Romans are also saying, yes, we agree. Well, what you don't have here, which you do have in First Maccabees, is that Judah Maccabees courts the Romans. So this is not like, oh, they eventually became a client state of the Romans. No. Judah Maccabees sends a letter to the Romans immediately and says, essentially, we'll be your allies if you help us against the Greeks, or you become our allies against the Greeks. And the Romans are like, sure, we'll do that, because they're doing that with everybody. And they're using that to later on basically take them over as client states and then parts of the empire. And so like, yeah, we'll do that. And all they do is write a stern letter of displeasure at the Greeks for messing with them, but they never help them. They never help them. Once they're totally independent, the Romans are like, oh yeah, we're here to help. And then they take over. But they never step in to help them against the Greeks. So anyways, he's talking about these covenants that they're making with Lysias and the Romans, which is, these are going to be other kingdoms that are dealing with Antiochus' sons. And then he says, when these covenants are made, Lysias went to the king, and the Jews were about their husbandry, and the governors of several places, Timotheus, Apollonius, and Genius, also Hieronymus and Dephanon, and beside them Nicanor, the governor of Cyprus, would not suffer them to be quiet and peace. So this is Nicanor. I'm sorry. This is the big bad general who's going to finally get it by the end of this. And it says, one of the things that happened, it says, when they heard that the Jamnites were minded to do in like manner unto the Jews that dwelt among them, they came to the Jamnites also by night. So this is what happens. This is the story here. Apparently, Jews were fleeing to refuge into these non-Jewish cities while Nicanor is trying to basically suppress this revolt. And remember, this is a revolt of guerrillas who are fighting and then running away, fighting and then running away, killing and then running and hiding, okay? So what do you do when you have people that are doing this? Well, you send in an army and you suppress everybody and try to squeeze them out, right? And so you have other people who are being oppressed, and they're trying to flee into Gentile cities. And one of these Gentile cities killed like 200 of them, who, because they see them all as traitors to the legitimate rulers who've been ruling for hundreds of years. Well, when they find out these people from Jamnia, they thought we're going to do the same thing. They went to them, burned their city, burned their boats and everything, killed them all. And that's why the Jews have Yavnia. That's Jamnia is Yavnia, okay? It's because they just murdered everybody there. Good old Jews. And then there's these other Jews who refuse to fight on the Sabbath. They're one of the contingents that are fighting with the Maccabees, because there's other groups of people that are joining them, but it's not a major army yet. But there's groups of people that are fighting with them, and one of them refuses to fight on the Sabbath, and they all get killed by the Greeks. And the Maccabees are like, "We'll fight on the Sabbath. Let's do this." So they break the Sabbath to do their terrorism, and it says they make a so when they find out these other people were killed, this is what they say. It says Judah Maccabeus sends an offering to Jerusalem so that these people will be resurrected in the resurrection. So basically what he's doing, and prayers for them. So this is where your Romans get the whole idea of prayers from the dead and writing, paying them money to get people out of purgatory. It comes from here, okay? This is why they keep in their canon two distinct and competing and contradicting stories of what happens with the Maccabees, because in this one you have praying for the dead and making reconciliation for the dead. In other words, making atonement for the dead with money. This is where they're going to justify their evil, godless practices. Because Judah Maccabeus did it, apparently. And there you go. Well, he's also killing people on the Sabbath and trying to overthrow the Gentiles, and all this stuff is illegal, and they wouldn't have gotten this problem in the first place if they weren't trying to self-fulfill Daniel. They have had no Messiah. They shouldn't be trying to overthrow the Gentiles because the Messiah is not there. But Judah Maccabeus is looking like a Messiah, and his name is Judah. His name is also Judas. Let's think about that. So there's these other people called the Essenes, and I've looked this up. I think this is where the name Hasidic Jews comes from, are named after these Hasidians. I could be wrong, but they're it's spelled with an H, and it's Hasidians. So Hasidic Jews might be named after these guys, but they joined with the Maccabees, They fight with Nicanor. Nicanor uses elephants because he's awesome. And this is what happens in this story, and it's totally different than the other story. It's so different. It says, basically Nicanor is like, let's call a truce here, okay? And he says, wherefore he sent Poseidonus and Theodotus and Matthias to make peace. So when they had taken long advisement therewith, and the captain had made a multitude acquainted therewith, and it appeared that they were all of one mind, they consented with covenants, okay? This is the Greeks with Judah Maccabees. Now, he's going to get murdered after this, but this is before that. He says, and appointed a day to meet together by themselves, and when the day came, stools were set for either of them. Ludus placed armed men ready in convenient places, lest some treachery should be suddenly practiced by the enemies, so they made a peaceable conference. Now Nicanor abode in Jerusalem, and did no hurt, but sent away the people that came flocking to him. And he would not willingly have Judas out of his sight, for he loved the man from his heart. He's going to get Judas murdered after this. This is Judah Maccabeus he's talking about. He prayed him to take a wife and to beget children, so he married, was quiet, and took part of this life. Okay? So what happens? He signs a truce with Judah Maccabees, and Judah stands down. This is what the story is. But Alcemus, perceiving the love that was betwixt them, and considering the covenants that were made, came to Demetrius, and told him that Nicanor was not well affected towards the state, for that he had ordained Judas, a traitor to his realm, to be the king's successor. Then the king, being enraged and provoked with the accusations of the most wicked man, wrote to Nicanor, signifying that he was much displeased with the covenants, and commanding him that he should send Maccabeus prisoner in haste to Antioch. So what this is saying is that the general made a deal. Nicanor made a deal, and he's probably vying for Antiochus' throne after this. And so Nicanor makes a deal with Judah Maccabees that, hey, when the king dies and I'm in charge, you can be the king of Judea. He buys them off. This is what it's saying. So it says, when this came to Nicanor's hearing, he was very much confounded in himself, and took it grievously that he should make void the articles which were agreed upon, and the man being in no fault. The man being in no fault. So Nicanor, they're saying, was forced to recant his agreement. But because there was no dealing against the king, he watched his time to accomplish this thing by policy. So he was going to basically, he was dealing with Judah to try to say, I'll let you be king of the Jews if you, mind you, he's a priest and he's basically a terrorist. But he's like, I'll let you be king of the Jews if you stand down and stop doing this revolt. Makes my job easier. Let's do this. And Antiochus Epiphanes and his family are fighting to maintain the control of their kingdom against the Parthians. So they're occupied. That's why they're not in this directly. They're always sending these generals. These generals are like, let's do this. Let's make a deal, okay? Let's see. But the other, knowing that he was notably prevented by Judah's policy, came into a great and holy temple and commanded the priests that were offering their usual sacrifices to deliver the man. So what's happening? The legitimate priests are trying, because they know Judas is trying to take over everything, are going to betray Judah Maccabees. Boy, who does this sound like? He's the savior of the Jews, and yet he's going to be betrayed by the priesthood. Oh, he sounds like a Christ type. And he says, when they swear that they could not tell whether the man was who saw it, he stretched out his hand towards the temple and made an oath in this manner. If you will not deliver me Judas as a prisoner, I will lay the temple of God even to the ground, and I will back down the altar and erect a notable temple unto Bacchus. So he's going to desolate the temple again if they don't give up Judas. Okay? So what happens is they all pray to God, and they said, destroy him like you destroyed Sennacherib's army. That's what they get. And what happens in this story is that Judas, remember, the priest is going to betray Judas. But Judas comes through, and he, it says, then the most ungracious wretch demanded if there were a mighty one in heaven that had command the Sabbath day be kept. And when they said there is one in heaven, the living Lord, that kept the mighty Sabbath day. Oh, this is when they killed the people who kept the Sabbath day, I think. What they end up getting after they pray. I'm trying to see who was this. Judah Maccabees has a vision of Onias the priest. Why? Because Onias was their last good priest before the priesthood starts getting bought and sold. And he says, and this was his vision, that Onias, who had been a priest, a virtuous and good man, reverent in conversation, gentle in condition, well spoken of, and exercised from a child in all points of virtue, holding up his hands, prayed for the whole body of the Jews. This done, in like manner there appeared a man with gray hairs, exceedingly glorious, who was wonderful and excellent majesty. So there's some angel or something appears. Then Onias answered, saying, This is the lover of the brethren, who prays much for the people of the holy city, to wit, Jeremiah, the prophet of God. So he apparently has a vision of Jeremiah and Onias. Whereupon Jeremiah, holding forth his right hand, gave Judas a sword of gold, and giving it, spoke thus, Take this holy sword, a gift from God, which with thou shalt wound your adversaries. So apparently dead Jeremiah shows up and gives Judah Maccabees a sword to fight his enemies. Why isn't any of this in 1 Maccabees? Considering 1 Maccabees is clearly written by the house of the Hasmoneans, and this is not, why are none of these in there? Thus, being well comforted by the words of Judas, which were very good, he was able to stir them up to a valor and encourage the hearts of the young men, and determined them not to pinch it. So apparently he has a golden sword now, which would just fall apart in battle, because any metal can just chop through a golden sword. But he's got a golden sword. And for the care that they took of their wives and the children, the brethren and folks, was the least account of them, but the greatest and principal fear was for the holy temple. So they're going to fight because they're threatening to desolate the temple again. And they are praying that they deliver them like they delivered in the days of Hezekiah from Sennacherib's army. And they don't really get into details about the battle, but they just say the battle was done. Returning with joy, they knew that Nicanor lay dead in his harness. They chop off his head, they hang it as evident and manifest sign to all of the help of the Lord. And then they start to celebrate this day, the day before. So they're adding a second Feast of Tabernacles in December. That becomes Hanukkah. And then they add this day to the day before Mordecai's day. That's Mordecai. So the day that they have the festival that's in the book of Esther, they're going to add another day before it, because that's the day that they killed Nicanor, apparently. That's the story. And that's the end. That's where he ends it, okay? So you can tell this is written before Judah Maccabees obviously gets killed, because he's going to get murdered after this. But even in this story, they're able to buy him off with a promise to make him king of the Jews. Think about this. This is their great revolutionary hero, and yet Nicanor's like, I'll make you king of the Jews if you stop fighting. And he's like, okay. And he takes a wife and he stops fighting. And the only reason he starts fighting again is because Antiochus Jr. is saying, no, you need to recant on that deal. Go arrest that dude. And Judas goes back to his merry men in the woods with his Robin Hood clan, and they fight again, and apparently they beat this Nicanor and chop off his head. And that's the end of that one, okay? So there's nothing in here regarding any fulfillment of any legitimate Bible prophecies related to Judah Maccabees. Not one thing. There's nothing about the Abomination of Desolation. There's not one citation from the Bible in here. Every single citation they have is from extra scriptural literature that is not part of the Bible, that they're claiming came from Nehemiah, and they regathered it in the day of the Maccabees. So you can tell they're already starting a BS campaign, because remember, Judah Maccabees was promised by Nicanor that he would be king of the Jews. So they're already starting a propaganda campaign to make it look like that Judah Maccabees is God's chosen man. He is the Messiah. He has a golden sword. He has angels covering him. He's shooting lightning and blinding his enemies. He's clearly the Messiah. That's what they're trying to make it look like. But they do not cite one Old Testament prophecy, because he doesn't fulfill one Old Testament prophecy. Not one. Okay? So, 30 years later, his nephew, John Hyrcanus, says, we can do better than that. But we don't believe in angels because we're Sadducees, so let's get rid of all this angel crap and let's just write a totally different story. And he does. And what he does is he starts out the story by saying what they did by turning the temple, he just flat out says that was they set up the Abomination of Desolation upon the altar. Now wait a minute. We know they're slaughtering a pig on the altar, and we know they're declaring the temples of Mount Gerizim and the temple in Jerusalem to be temples to Jupiter. And we know in one of the two temples they're carrying out some kind of weird orgies and stuff. Probably is Jerusalem. But there's nothing in the previous story about setting up an idol on the altar or setting up an abomination of desolation. What are they talking about here? See, I want you guys to see this because you've heard the story and I've heard the story about how Antiochus Epiphanes set up an idol with his face carved into it. It was Jupiter with his face carved into it in the Holy of Holies, and that was the Abomination of Desolation. None of that is in either one of these books, nor is any of the Hanukkah legend in either one of these books. So whatever all that stuff is, those are tall tales that developed afterwards. I'll check Josephus to see if it's in Josephus, but I'm pretty sure it's not. If somebody wants to comment in the comment section where they can find out where those stories came from, I don't know. Maybe they're in the Josephus, but they certainly were not in the books of the Maccabees when the stuff actually happened. And if it happened, they would be. If he legitimately set up an altar in the Holy of Holies, or an idol in the Holy of Holies, they would have definitely noted that, okay? If they had had a miracle having to do with cleansing the temple for 8 days, they would have definitely noted that, but neither one of them do, okay? So, it says, they set up the Abomination of Desolation upon the altar and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side. So what are they doing? They're setting up Jupiter worship, or Zeus worship all over Israel. This is what he's doing. He's trying to Hellenize them. He's trying to bring Greek paganism in. But they never call it the Abomination of Desolation. Why? Because this book is trying to convince you that he is the Messiah, more and more, and that there's two Messiahs now. So then it says, and whosoever was found with any book of the Testament, so any of the Old Testament books, or if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should be put to death. So they're burning the library, they're burning the books, they're persecuting anyone who has any book of the Old Testament. That's what they're claiming. It says, in those days arose Matthias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the house of Jorib, from Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin. This is not the high priest. He doesn't even live in Jerusalem. He dwells in the city called Modin, which is, I believe, closer to the area of Gibeah. It's up here. So here's Jerusalem and here's Modin. So it's not even up there. It's what would be in the West Bank now. But it's on the road between Jerusalem and like Galilee. So this is Modin. This is where his base is. So he's not a high priest. He's not a priest in the temple, but he is part of the priesthood. And he has a son called Judah Maccabeus, Judah the Hammer. Good for him. And he says, now when he left speaking these words, so he's going to get him started, and he's going to get his sons on this charge. Remember, he's running it for 6 years before he dies. And he says that remember, this is not just in Jerusalem, so he doesn't ever cleanse the temple. He never does this in Jerusalem. They're spreading these altars everywhere. And when they did a sacrifice in the altar in Modin, which was his town outside of Jerusalem, he ran and killed the guy who did it. This is how the revolt starts, okay? This is not, you've probably heard this story, and it sounds like he was a priest in the temple, and he saw them doing this thing, and he killed the guys who did it or started resisting. This is not true. He was in a small town outside Jerusalem, and they were doing it in his town, so he started doing it. And then he says, thus he's dealt zealously for the law of God like Phinehas did to Zambri the son of Salom. Why? Because they're going to make a point that these guys, even though they're not part of the legitimate high priesthood, they're descended from Phinehas, and Phinehas was promised an eternal priesthood. Remember, this is John Hyrcanus, who's trying to make him the Melchizedek priest and Judah the Messiah. They're making them two different people. So you got Messiah ben David and Messiah ben Joseph kind of thing going on. And remember, you're going to find out about this. So there's the Hasidians who join with him again. And this is Matthias and his friends went around and pulled down the altar. And whatever children soever they found within the coast of Israel uncircumcised, they circumcised valiantly. What does that mean? They forced them to get circumcised. This is how the Sicarii are going to start. And the Zealots, they start doing this. This is why Paul and John both have experience with guys following them into the bathhouse to see if they're circumcised. Because these guys are trying to be terrorized, forcing you to get circumcised guy, like the Maccabees before them. These are their heroes. So it says, they recovered the law out of the hand of the Gentiles and out of the hand of the kings, neither suffered them they the sinner to triumph. I don't know what this means, but that's what he's claiming has happened while he's still alive. And then they start telling you all the stories of the people before them that God helped to encourage them: Ananias, Azarias, and Misael, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego; Daniel in the lion's den. And after this guy dies, he says, and behold, I know your brother of Simon is a man of good counsel. So he's basically making him the main advisor in the group. As for Judah Maccabeus, he has been mighty and strong, even up to his youth. Let him be your captain and fight the battle of the people. So he's basically saying, follow Simon and Judah. These are brothers, okay? Simon, Judah. He's got 4 sons, actually, I think. And then he dies in the 146th year. So they're counting years from the beginning of Alexander the Great's reign. Over the Seleucids or whatever. And so the 146th year is going to be like 145 is when the revolt starts. So that's 167. And this is going to be like 166. So you just want to look at these years. 146. Remember that 145 is 167. And that's how you're going to count down from there. Count forward. And this book is going to take place around about 35 years. And he says, behold, I know that your brother Simon is a man of good counsel. So he's doing that. And then he says, he's talking about in Judah, salvation prospered in his hand. Remember, they're not considering, these guys don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. You find evidence of the resurrection of the dead in 1 Maccabees, but these are Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Why are they starting this anti-resurrection of the dead thing? And the answer is, because if they believed in the resurrection of the dead, they could not convince you that Judah Maccabeus is the Messiah, because you're supposed to have a literal resurrection from the dead at this time. And so they're making salvation being about political deliverance. Does this sound familiar, Christians? They're making it be about political deliverance rather than eschatological deliverance. And so they're saying salvation prospered in his hand. So they're taking out any mention of the resurrection, any mention of angels. Why? Because we want you to think Judah Maccabeus is the Messiah and this is the millennium. That's why. So they said to one another, let us restore the decayed fortune of our people and let us fight for our people in the sanctuary. They cried out with a loud voice towards heaven, saying, what shall we do with these? Whether shall we carry them away? For the sanctuary is trodden down and profane, and thy priests are in heaviness and brought low. Then Judah said to his brethren, behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up and cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary. So this is telling the same story. Notice I'm 23 pages in out of 98 here. Okay. First Maccabees is like 60-some pages, and it covers, it goes back way back in history. This is going to cover their battles in a lot more detail. So it says they saw the sanctuary desolate and the altar profane. Notice it's just the altar that's in the courtyard that is profane. There is nothing about setting up an idol in the. There's nothing about anything inside the temple that happens. It's just the altar in the courtyard, and it says in the courts as in a forest or in 1 or 2 mountains. Yea, the priests' chambers are pulled down. So the priests' chambers are pulled down. They rent their clothes and they made great lamentation, cast ashes on their heads. Judah appointed certain men to fight against those who were in the fortress until they had cleansed the sanctuary. So whatever Fort Antonio was, there was apparently a fortress like that already there. It says, so he chose priests, blameless in conversation, such as had pleasure in the law, who cleanse the sanctuary and bear out the defiled stones into an unclean place. So this is what Judah Maccabeus is doing. He's not taking a priesthood, but his brother will. Notice he's setting up other priests, good priests, but his brother's going to take over the priesthood, and he's going to buy it. Just like the guy who started the whole problem they had in the first place. He's going to buy it from one of the Greeks, okay? These guys are as corrupt as anybody. So it says they're going to take the stones of the altar because it's just the altar that's been profaned. The temple has not been profaned. You can't call this the abomination of desolation. But they profane the altar, and so what they do is they take the stones of the altar and they throw them down the mountain. And they said, we're just going to leave them there until a prophet should show us what should be done with them. Well, no prophet comes. They don't have a prophet. They're done. The next prophet they're going to get is John the Baptist. So they don't have a prophet coming, and they're basically, we're going to throw them down there until and then they build a new altar. So they rebuild the altar. That's the only thing that's defiled. And then it says, and upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were on the candlestick they lighted, that they might give light to the temple. That's it. That's all they had to do to cleanse the temple. There was no cleansing ritual they had to do and cleanse it for 8 days because the temple wasn't defiled. It was just the altar that was defiled because they sacrificed a pig on it. That's it. Now it says, now the 5 and 25th day of the month, which is called the month of Caslu, in the 140 and the 8th year, they rose up in bedtimes and morning and offered the sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings that they had made. We have 2 witnesses that there was no abomination of desolation, but they're calling sacrificing a pig on the altar an abomination of desolation. And later on, they're going to make up the story about the Zeus statue because it's not here at all. They're trying to make him out to be the Messiah. And it says they kept the dedication of the altar, not the temple, 8 days, and offered burnt offerings with gladness and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. Notice there's nothing about an 8-day period needed to cleanse the temple. Oh, and by the way, I counted how many days this happens. Daniel says 2,300 mornings and evenings. This is 1,100 days total, even in the longer version. One is 2 years, so that's like 700 and some days. The longer version, where they extend it to 3 years, is 1,100 some days. They don't come close to 2,300 mornings and evenings that the temple's defiled before it needs to be cleansed. So we know you can't take Daniel 8 and say it was fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes' day. That's about the Antichrist. That's the future desolation of the temple, and that is going to include both the sacrifices that aren't legitimate and the abomination of desolation. That's all it's going to take to, and it's not 7 years, it's about 6.5 years, because they're not going to do it the whole time because Jesus is going to touch down and put a stop to that crap, like superhero drop style. So it says, then they kept the dedication, and this is moreover, Judas and his brother with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication should be kept in their season 1 year from the space of 8 days from the 5 and 20th day of the month of Caslu, and with mirth and gladness. Notice you have 2 witnesses that they established this, and it has nothing to do with a miracle. It's a second Feast of Tabernacles to honor the time they spent fighting guerrilla war, basically. So let's just not try to celebrate Hanukkah, how about? Because we're not fake Jews making up fake Jew stuff. Yea, all our brethren were in the places of Tobi are put to death. I'm thinking that's the Tobiads. Now, they keep mentioning the 3 jurisdictions in Samaria here that the Jews are claiming sovereignty over. And if you go read the book of Ezra, there's 3 guys who are leaders in Samaria who are giving the Jews guff. And one of them is a Tobias. And that seems to be where Tobit comes from. And he's saying all of our brethren that were in the places of Tobi are put to death. Now remember, Ezra and those guys don't like Tobias. But by this time, remember, Tobias seems to buy his way into their good graces because he has wealth. And they are Jews. The Tobiads are Jews. They probably do have some marriage with the Ammonites. They're not Samaritans necessarily. But their government is in Samaria. You have something like Judea and Samaria, or Judah and the West Bank. Something like that in those days. So, after that, it's going to have this story that is not in 1 Maccabees at all about Basra. Why? Because there are several prophecies in the Bible about the Messiah and Basra. And so they mention him going up into Basra and having a great slaughter up there. And there's literally like 4 prophecies that are about Basra and this great slaughter and it burning with fire. And they're all messianic prophecies, because that's where Jesus is going to go tear stuff up, because he sends the Jews there to hide when they flee Jerusalem. And then it looks like the armies of the kings of the east are coming to get him after they destroy what I believe is Neom, or Mystery Babylon. And that's when Jesus shows up there and he gets coated with blood from killing all of them. And it says he spreads his wings over Basra. So it's like a chicken gathering chicken gathering their chicks under their wings. That term is a hen, and it can be a female any bird. And it's talking about how he spreads his wings over Basra like an eagle. So it's Jesus actually fulfilling what he wanted to do to the Jews when they flee Jerusalem in the last days. And then it says he gets coated with blood. So whatever he's going to do is he is going to, by himself, supernaturally fight everybody who's coming after those Jews. And, they're trying to say that's Judah Maccabeus basically killing a bunch of people in Basra. And so they make all these details about this fight that he had in Basra and how he destroyed Bozor, or the land of Edom, right after that. Because if you go read Jeremiah 49:22, he says, behold, he will come in. Let me show you this on here. He says, behold, he will come in up as an eagle and spread his wings over Basra. And that day, the heart of Edom will be as the heart of a woman in her pangs. He says, in Amos 1:2, but I will send fire upon Teman, and I shall devour the palaces of Basra. Micah 2:12, he says, I will surely assemble Jacob, all of thee. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Basra. And so this is talking about them gathering them there, and these other ones are talking about him. Who is this that comes from Edom, dyed garments from Basra? This is glorious in his apparel, traveling in his strength. In the greatness of his strength, I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Remember, Judah Maccabeus wrought a great salvation. Micah 2:12, he says, when he talks about, remember Judah is called the hammer, okay? Well, it says, he will put them together in Basra. He says, the breaker is come up before them. They have broken up and have passed through the gate. They are gone out by it, and the king shall pass before them, and the Lord on ahead of them. See what he's saying here. Remember, the story about Judah Maccabeus from 1 Maccabees is he's got an angel that goes before him and guards him and fights him. And it's their king. Remember what he gets is he gets the opportunity to be the king before he gets murdered. So all this stuff about Basra, they're writing about Judah Maccabeus because they're painting him out to be the Messiah. So it says, now we're going to go back to Antiochus. Remember, this is the second version of this. So Antiochus is traveling through the high countries, and he's in Persia, and he gets sick and dies. And he says, you're going to have the same story about Lysias and how he's going to go up against Jerusalem, and he's going to back down because he realizes how much God is on their side. So then he's talking about another one of the kings who was from beyond the river, so beyond the Euphrates, is basically going to send an army to help fight them. So there's these armies here that aren't mentioned in 1 Maccabees. And 1 Maccabees is saying he's pulling from these other 5 books and kind of summarizing it. So it could just be a summary, but it's clear that they want the Basra story to stand out. It's they go into more detail about what he does in Basra than any other place. And then it says, the flesh of thy saints they have cast out, and the blood they have shed around them. So here they're saying he spoke to them peaceably and sware unto them, saying, we will produce neither harm to you nor your friends, whereupon they believed them. Howbeit he took 60 of them, so 60 of them, and slew them in one day, according to the words which he wrote. The flesh of thy saints they have cast out, and their blood they have shed around Jerusalem, and there was none to bury them. Okay, this is citing prophecy, Psalm 79:2. The dead bodies of the servants have been given to the fowls of the heaven, the flesh of the saints of the earth. Their blood they have shed all around to Jerusalem, and there was none to bury them. So what they're claiming is the Psalm of Asaph. It says, the heathen are come into thy inheritance, thy holy temple they have defiled, they have laid Jerusalem on heaps. He's claiming this is about Judah Maccabees. And it's the temple being defiled and the Jews crying out to God, when will you deliver us so that we can praise you for all generations? They're saying, well, that was fulfilled in Judah Maccabees. So it says, and they had pulled down the abomination which she had set up on the altar in Jerusalem. Again, they're going to mention this abomination over and over and over again, and it's always on the altar. It's always on the altar. So what is it? Is it a statue on the altar? I don't know, but it doesn't go into the temple. It doesn't go into the holy place or the most holy place. It doesn't go into the temple at all. It's on the altar, which is in the courtyard. You don't burn a giant grill indoors. I don't know if you don't know that. So let's see. Here where he says, at that time Lysias heard say that Philip, who Antiochus the king, while he lived, had appointed to bring up his son Antiochus that he might be king. So this is Antiochus Jr. is now going to be king. And this is where they're going to threaten to take Judah again. And he said they're praying that the Lord destroys them like they destroyed the armies of Sennacherib. And they turn them back. And this is where we know they would have written First Maccabees, because it says, moreover, they ordained to keep this day, the 13th of Adar. Thus the land of Judah was in rest a little while. So after Nicanor's dead, they're going to ordain a feast. And so you see that this is going to stop. That is where Second Maccabees ends, and they're going to write this letter in this time where they had rest a little while. Now, listen to what Judah does after this. Remember, first, he was willing to stand down if they were going to let him be king. That's number one. Okay? Number two, he writes a letter. He hears of the Romans. Now, this is all bullcrap, but he hears it. That the Romans, that they were mighty and valiant men, and such as would lovingly accept all who joined themselves to them and make a league of amity with all that came to them. Well, the Romans would do this as a pretense to eventually take you over. That's what they would do. They would start out, make a league of friendship with you, and then they would come in and be like, oh, we're helping you put down a civil uprising. Let us just establish a base here. And then you're a client state all of a sudden, and then if you don't do things their way, they're just going to take over. That's what the Romans do. And he said they were men of great valor, and it was told to them of their wars and their noble acts that they'd done among the Galatians, and how they had conquered them and brought them under tribute. And says the country of India and Media and Lydia and all the goodliest countries which they took to them and gave to Eumenes, King Eumenes. So I don't know exactly what this is, but I don't know if they know how far away India is, but Media and Lydia are basically in Turkey, Syria, and Turkey. So they're saying that the Romans gave this land of Antiochus. So they essentially, the Romans had confiscated territories of Antiochus and given them to other kings who they made client states to them. So he's like, oh, that sounds like since I missed out on becoming king by the Greeks, because that didn't work out, I'm going to petition the Romans. Maybe they'll make me a king too. And that's what he's going to do. So he says, he's talking about how great the Romans were. And he says, yet for all this, in other words, for all the countries they've taken over and all the power they have, yet for none of this wore a crown or was clothed in purple to be magnified thereby. This is bullcrap. The Romans were all about, once they got silk and once they got purple, they were all about that stuff. But he's talking about how they're just these noble people who are ruled by the Senate. Nobody is vainglorious among them. They're just everything that we say America is, but it's not. And basically they're saying that there's no envy or emulation among them. Like, remember, it's not going to be long after this that Julius Caesar is going to come up and they're going to fight with this, and Ptolemy is going to do this. But during this time, the Romans are mostly just sending out armies, and they are ruled by a senate. So it seems like they're just the greatest thing since the bee's knees, because if you don't like the Greek rule, they will make you essentially a client state of theirs and give you rule. So Judas basically sends the son of John, his brother, and the son of Eleazar, I don't know who that is, basically two ambassadors to Rome to make a confederacy with them. And then they send back a brass tablet saying, we're Confederate with you. And the Romans never help them. Never once help them. But they sign a pact with them that says basically if anyone tries to fight the Romans in their territory, they will fight on the Roman side and will help the enemy. And if anyone tries to invade them, the Romans will come help them and will not aid their enemy. Well, the Romans never keep up their end of the bargain. But the Romans are doing this because it allows them to put bases in anyone's country when they feel it's time to expand their empire. So it says, in the same manner also, if war comes first in the nation of the Jews, the Romans will help them with all their heart according as the time shall be appointed to them. In other words, when we feel like it, we'll come help you. That's what they're saying. And so this is what the Romans do to help them. As touching the evils, they write a letter. They write a sternly worded letter, letting the Greeks know that they made a pact with them, and says, as touching the evils that Demetrius, so Demetrius is the next successor after Antiochus Jr., as touching the evils that Demetrius does to the Jews, we have written him saying, wherefore have you made the yoke heavy upon our friends, the Confederates, the Jews? Because that's how Romans talk. They talk like Jews, right? This is probably another forged letter. If therefore they complain any more against thee, we will do them justice and fight with thee by sea and by land. I can almost guarantee you the Romans did not write this letter. I'll bet you the Maccabees wrote this letter, and they're showing this to their own people to make it look like, look, we're the legitimate kings because the Romans will come help us. But if you overthrow us, they won't help. So Judas is like, after this, remember, this is in the short piece they have, Demetrius starts coming up against them again. And I think Demetrius is either a new general or a new king. I think he's a new general. And they send a bunch of people with him, and Judas is like, let's go fight him. Maybe we'll win. And they don't. Judas is killed, and the remnant flees. And they write a story about, how the valiant man has fallen. Dang it, your Messiah just sucks at this. Your Messiah was willing to stand down if they made him a king and just marry and settle down. But that didn't work out. So he tried to get the Romans to be a client state to the Romans, essentially. That didn't work out. So he has to go fight and defend himself. And the Romans don't show up to help, even though they're showing off to everybody how the Romans are going to come for us because of Judah Maccabees' clear grandiloquence and pomp. And nope, doesn't work. He goes and fights and he dies. And it says, in those days there was a great famine, by reason of whereof the country revolted and went with them. So Judas dies, but then, to the benefit of the Maccabees, a famine's going to break out. And because the famine's breaking out, and the Greeks are known to tax them like half of their farm goods, they're going to join the Maccabees in the revolt, and it's going to get bigger. Okay, Judas does not deliver them at all. He just gets himself killed. He tries a couple ways to, buy the office of the king and, get them left alone, essentially. But it doesn't work, and he dies. But then there's a famine, and so people are going to join with their revolt because there's a famine. So you have a terrorist group running around and then a general peasants' revolt because of the famine. So it says that after this, word came to Jonathan and Simon, his brothers, I should say, that the children of Jambri made a great marriage and were bringing a bride from Nabathea with a great train, as being the daughter of a great princess of Canaan. Now, I don't know why they're always attacking these people from Jambri, I'm sorry. I don't know who these children of Jambri are. Jonathan sent his brother John. So apparently they kidnapped or killed his brother John. I'm sorry. So Demetrius and Bacchides are the other two generals who are involved with Nicanor. So they don't even overthrow. They just overthrow one of the three generals. So when they write first Maccabees, they've only overthrown one of the three generals that are sent to Judea to put them down, or commanders or whatever. And Judas is killed by this Bacchides, who's the second one. So he kills Nicanor, but then he gets killed by Bacchides. And Bacchides finds out that they basically exalt Jonathan, his brother. Remember, that was the counselor, in his place. And what they do is they send their brother John, which I'm assuming is a younger brother, to send essentially their carriage, which I would assume is their family's wealth. It's their supplies. If they can keep it with their city, with their town, and the people just take it. And so what they do is they attack these people and slaughter a wedding full of people. Like real heroes. And this is to avenge their brother John. Apparently he does get killed. So there's 2 of Matthias's kids are dead. So they go over the Jordan. Remember, they're running and hiding because now they've got 2 armies after them, and they don't really take over and win anything. Remember, Nicanor was trying to deal with Judah Maccabees. That's why they have peace. They have this whole story about he cut off his head and they had peace for a while. No, Nicanor was trying to deal with him, and then he got pulled back by his superiors to say, you can't deal with him like that. And then they're going to fight, and Nicanor's going to die somehow. We don't really know how. So then again, these guys are going to say that we're going to pull down the temple and the sanctuary, but the guy who's going to do it dies, and they keep putting this out there, like, because God strikes anyone dead who messes with the temple, because the temple is essentially an idol to them. And they have 2 years of rest in Judea. And then afterwards it says Simon, they were with them. They went away to Bethbasi, which is in the wilderness, and they repaired the decays thereof and made it strong. So they're in a little wilderness city. So again, notice they're trying to make Judah king. They're trying to put themselves out there as kings, but they're never in Jerusalem, because if they go to Jerusalem, the Greeks are just going to kill them. So they're always fortifying they're kind of like David on the run, basically. They're always fortifying some small town in the wilderness. And they're basically a gang. They're almost exactly like David when he was on the run, only not anointed. So it says, in the days of Jonathan, it says, the sword ceased from Israel, but Jonathan dwelt in Maccabees, and they began to govern the people. So now they get another city. Remember, they start in this other city. They get in this city, Maccabees, which is right over by Gibeah. It's the city of Michmash. So you see Gibeah right here. It's the city up in the mountains, and they set up a government there, and they set up a fortified city for themselves. And for whatever reason, things die down. Now, most of the time things are dying down, it's not because of their great victories or anything. It's because the Greeks are overthrowing each other. So you have multiple descendants of Antiochus that are going back and forth trying to fight with each other. And you even have the Ptolemies starting to get involved with them from Egypt. Remember, they still are fighting back and forth. And so it says, in the 160th year of Alexander, the son of Antiochus, named Epiphanes, went up and took Ptolemais. So this is Alexander. This is why it stops for a while. Alexander is another son of Antiochus. Remember, there's Antiochus Jr., and this is Alexander, the son of Antiochus. And so Demetrius seems to be trying to rule Antiochus's kingdom, and Antiochus's son is saying, he sets up a city and saying, no, I'm the real king. And what he tries to do is marry in with the Ptolemies to legitimize his king and get help essentially against the other king. Now remember, his father just tried to invade Egypt in the last generation. This was 20 years ago. Okay? I don't even think it's that long. But this is politics, and they're all Greeks, and this Demetrius, who is apparently not of the royal blood, is trying to take over. I think he's a general or something. And so you've essentially got these revolts going on between Greeks and Greeks, and the Jews are going to try to play off this. The Maccabees are going to try to play off this. So what they do is they have their little fortified city, and they're kind of governing the Jews in this little local area. And what Jonathan is going to do, Jonathan is not the high priest. He never had the legitimate high priesthood. Remember, his brother set up legitimate priests after they cleansed the temple. And then he died. Well, Jonathan goes and puts on the priest's robe, and he shows up to remember that now they've got a rival to Demetrius who's been oppressing them. Because Demetrius has a rival, he's backing off and leaving them alone for now. So what they do is they go to this city of Ptolemais or whatever, which is like in Phoenicia. It's kind of around Tyre. It's like a little port city. And they basically go there. He puts on the robe and gather together forces and provided much armor. So he basically sends up an armored troop with himself dressed like the high priest and basically shows up with all this pomp and kind of pays homage to this guy and saying, hey, we'll help you against Demetrius, because Demetrius has been fighting him. And he says, whereof you have kept covenants with us and continued in our friendship, not joining yourselves with our enemies, we have heard thereof and are glad. Wherefore now continue ye to be faithful unto us, and we will well recompense you for things in your behalf. And this is what the Greeks are doing. Because you have rivals going on with Antiochus' kingdom as it's falling apart, they're going to keep telling the Jews, hey, if you help us, we will make you king, and we'll make Judea free. And the Jews are going to buy this, and they're going to keep betraying them again and again and again. So he says, now I do free you. Remember, this is Alexander. I do free you from your sake. I release the Jews from tributes and from customs and from salt and from crown taxes. Let Jerusalem be holy and free, and the borders thereof, and its tents, and its tithes and tributes. Moreover, I freely set at liberty every one of the Jews that were carried captives in the land of Judea to any part of my kingdom, and I will that all my officers remit the tributes, even of their cattle. Furthermore, I will that all the feasts and the Sabbaths and the new moons and the solemn days and the 3 days and the feasts and all the 3 days and the immunity of the land and Jews in my realm. And further, I will further that there be enrolled among the king's forces about 30,000 men of the Jews, unto whom pay shall be given as belongs to all the king's forces. So what he's doing is this Alexander is dealing with John. Remember, Judah Maccabees was willing to stand down if he could be made king of the Jews. Now Jonathan is basically saying, make me the high priest and ruler governor of the Jews, and what I'll do is contribute 30,000 troops to your army, and in exchange for basically freedom and immunity from taxes. So they're wheeling and dealing to make them a client state to now the rival to this Demetrius. And so he says, I will further be enrolled among... Okay, so then he says, and concerning the three... Oh, also what they want as part of the deal is they want to rule over Samaria. So in concerning the 3 governments that are added to Judea from the country of Samaria, let them be joined with Judea, that they may be reckoned under one, nor bound to obey authority other than the high priest. In other words, what they want to do is get rid of this rival priesthood that Sanballat started in Samaria and put all the Samaritans who they don't like under their rule. That's what they want to do. And then besides this, 5,000 shekels of silver, which they took from the uses of the temple out of the accounts year by year, even those things shall be released, because they appertain to the priests and the minister. And whoso thereof they be that flee into the temple in Jerusalem, or be within the liberties hereof, being indebted to the king, or any other matter, let them be at liberty, and all that have in their realm. So they're saying, oh, I'm sorry, this might be coming from Demetrius now. There's 2 different people competing for their loyalty right now. And so they're writing them these letters about how they're going to make them a free state, and Jonathan Maccabeus can rule, and he's dealing with both of them. So it says, so the king honored him and wrote him among his chief friends and made him a duke and partaker in his dominion. It says, furthermore, in the 103 score, so the 165th year, so we're looking at, I think 145 was, so this would be about 147 BC. He says, came Demetrius, the son of Demetrius, out of Crete into the land of his fathers, whereof when Alexander heard tell, he was right sorry and returned to Antioch. Then Demetrius made Apollonius the governor of Syria his general, and gathered together great hosts and camped in Jamnia, and sent unto Jonathan the high priest, saying, Thou alone lifted up against thyself up against us, and I am laughed to scorn for thy sake and reproach. And why dost thou mount power against us in the mountains? Now therefore, if thou is truest in thine own strength, come down and help us in the plain field, and there let us try the matter together, for with me is power of the cities. So what is he saying? Basically, Demetrius is trying to gain control against his rival, and he's saying, Jonathan, you're the only one who's sworn loyalty to my rival. Let's deal. And he's basically saying, I have control of the cities, you guys just have control of the mountains, let's deal. And he's like basically telling him to come down here. And around this time, Jonathan is going to set fire to Azotus and destroy the temple of Dagon. So basically they're helping his rival here. And what Demetrius says is, I will make you the high priest and ruler if you stop assaulting our cities, because he's got a rival to deal with. Okay, he's trying to put down a rival for his claim to Antiochus' kingdom. And he's basically saying, I'll buy you off by making you high priest and ruler over the 4 governments. In other words, the 3 governments of Samaria and Judea. Okay, so I'll make you the ruler over that if you stop fighting on behalf of this Alexander, who's my rival. So he does that, and it's in that time, it says, now when Jonathan saw that time served him. Oh, I'm sorry, Demetrius is young Antiochus' general. So it's Alexander and Antiochus, 2 brothers fighting for the throne. And he says, young Antiochus writes him this, and Jonathan's kind of going to go for it. It looks like he's going to pull off trying to attack the city that he's attacking, because they're basically saying, we'll make you high priest and ruler. So he's backing off. And then it's around this time, remember, he's trying to legitimize his claim as the new high priest. He is going to send letters back and forth to the Lacedaemonians, which are the Spartans. And he's going to say, hey, we found this letter from Onias, the high priest during the time of Darius. This is like, I think, Darius the second or third. This is where they acknowledge that the Lacedaemonians are their fellow brothers, descendants of Abraham. So they're acknowledging that the Spartans are the Danites. They know they're the Danites. And they're saying, we've got this letter that from your former king, acknowledging that we're all from the seed of Abraham, and that we have a league between us because we're all on the same team, and we have a league with the Romans. And what they're doing is they're sending letters to these foreigners in the exact same way your bishops and stuff would get letters from the other bishops confirming that they're the legitimate bishop. Well, these guys are usurpers just like those bishops are. And so they're sending letters to the foreign kings to come back to them saying, we're acknowledging our league of friendship with you, O king so-and-so, O high priest so-and-so, to show that the foreign rulers are acknowledging me as the high priest. So there it is, I'm the high priest. Remember, he all started this by dressing up in the priest pomp when he wasn't the legitimate high priest. So they're trying to get this legitimacy. This is the second time they're doing this. Remember, Judah Maccabeus did it first. Now his brother Jonathan's doing it. And he's saying the king chose, let's see, whoops. And then, so he's dealing with Antiochus, and then this guy Tryphon, who's going to kill Antiochus Jr., is going to send him a letter, and he's going to send to him a letter that says, hey, if you basically break your league with this Alexander guy. So remember, because Alexander is courting Jonathan, they're courting Jonathan. And so Jonathan's going to keep wheeling and dealing with these people. And so what you have is you have Alexander ruling from the city in Phoenicia against Antiochus Jr. ruling in Antioch. Then Antioch gets killed by Tryphon. And Tryphon is going to try to lure Jonathan into basically to assassinate him. And they're going back and forth for a little while, because what's going to happen is Alexander's going to leave. He's going to get killed by some king in Arabia and get beheaded. Then Ptolemy, his father-in-law, is going to go up to his kingdom and take it over and try to make himself king over all of Alexander's empire in Egypt and Asia. Okay, and this is like the height of the Ptolemaic dynasty before it starts to decline, and then the Romans are going to take it over. And then what happens is that guy's going to die, so Ptolemy's going to die, and Demetrius is going to end up taking over the one guy's kingdom, and the other guy's kingdom is going to be taken over by this Tryphon. So you still have this basically civil war competition going on for who's going to control Antiochus' kingdom after this. And he sends a letter to Jonathan basically saying, I'll make you the high priest and the ruler of Judea and stuff like this if you don't work with my enemies and work with me. And there's even a point where Jonathan's going to send armies to deliver Antioch, either Antioch or Damascus, from a riot or a siege, and protect the king. And it says, therefore, send him now home again, and choose a few men to wait on thee, and come with me to Ptolemais, and I will give it to thee. So that's part of the deal, too. He's like, this city of Ptolemais, which is basically a port city, which is being built up by his rival. He's like, I'll give you this city if you join with me. And it says, so he says, so Jonathan, believing him, did as he bade him, and sent away this host, and went into the land of Judea. Now he's already pledged loyalty to his competitor here, Alexander. And then when Ptolemy takes it over, he pledges loyalty to him and shows up with all his pomp again, and that guy declares him the high priest. Now he's switching teams, and he's going back to Tryphon, who is the guy who killed Antiochus Jr. So it's like he's just figuring out whoever's in charge, and he's just switching teams and saying, as long as I'm in charge, then yeah, I'll be on your side. And so it says, as soon as Jonathan entered the Ptolemies, many of the Ptolemies shut the gates and took him and all that were with him, and they slew them with the sword. So they bought his ruse, because now they're like, they know this guy has already done this with the Ptolemies and with the Alexanders, and while sending letters back and forth with our king that, oh yeah, if you accept me as legitimate, I'll be on your side too. So they're just like, so tell him we're going to give him this city, bring him here, and we're just going to kill him. And that's how they kill him. So Judah Maccabeus tries to wheel and deal to be the king. He ends up dead. Jonathan tries to wheel and deal to be the high priest and ruler. He ends up dead. So now we're on the third guy, Simon, the third brother. So it says, now send 100 talents of silver and 2 sons for hostages, that he that is set at liberty may not revolt against us, and we will let him go. So this is what goes on with Simon now. You have 2 different stories going on here. The one story is they've already killed Jonathan. Okay, they caught him and they killed him. But they also have a letter that says, this Tryphon is sending to his brother, send us Jonathan's 2 sons as hostages, and we'll set him free. So they're claiming they still have him alive. And it says, whereupon Simon, albeit he perceived that he spoke deceitfully to him, yet sent the money and the children, lest peradventure he should procure to himself great hatred of the people, who might have said, because I sent him not the money and the children, therefore is Jonathan dead. So he's sending, after Jonathan is supposedly dead, he's sending him Jonathan's kids. Why? Because he's going to get the high priesthood and the throne, and then it's going to be his son who gets it after him. So whether he's just stupid and just gets duped and sends his kids and he thinks he's dead, whatever's going on, he's sending his kids as like a ransom to get him back, when apparently they're saying he's already dead. So I don't know what's going on here. These guys are not the most competent. And then he says, so he sent him the children 100 talents of gold or silver or whatever. Howbeit Tryphon disassembled, and neither would he let Jonathan go. So now he's saying after they've already said Jonathan's dead, they're saying now they wouldn't let him go. Something doesn't add up here. So there's something really sketch about this story, and it's like, okay, did you send him to get the bribe, or did you not? Did they kill him after that, or did they kill him before that? It just doesn't add up. And maybe they are just trying to kill him and his heirs, because he has made himself the high priest and kind of a king. I don't know. But it said that Simon built a monument in the sepulchre of his father and his brethren, and raised a loft in the site, and had with hewn stone behind it before. Moreover, he set up 7 pyramids, one after another, for his father and his mother and his 4 brethren. So he's building pyramid monuments for him and his brethren. Does it sound like he's sucking up to Egypt a little bit? Yeah. So then Demetrius ends up taking over. And what I think Demetrius, I think this is the same Demetrius who was fighting against him and his brothers before, has taken over that second kingdom from this Ptolemais, and Tryphon is up in Antioch. And he basically is now going to the guy who is their former enemy. And he's saying, King Demetrius, unto Simon the high priest, king of the Jews, and also to the elders, unto Simon the high priest and friend of kings, as unto the elder and the nation of the Jews, sendeth greetings, a golden crown and a scarlet robe which you have sent to us, which you received, and we are ready to make steadfast peace with you, yea, and to write up our officers to confirm the immunities which you have granted. So what happens? They've got another claimant to the throne who's offering them basically immunity, and they're saying, we will, if you want to make us have this immunity from taxes and stuff like that, we'll be on your side. And he says, and they entered it in the 320th day of the second month in the 171st year. So let's see, we're at 36 years in from 67, so we're at 141 BC. Now it says, in the 112th year, Demetrius gathered his force together and went into Media to get him up to fight against Tryphon. Okay, so now they're fighting in Media over this kingdom. And so you see they're just paying off and bribing whoever's in charge to keep them in charge. And it says, as for the land of Judea, it was quiet in the days of Simon. Well, yeah, because they're fighting for the throne, and they bribed the guy who's closest to them. And it was honorable from all his acts and all he did, and he took Joppa for a haven and made an entrance to the Isles of the Sea, so now they have a port city. Because remember, they're just a small mountain kingdom, but now they've got a port city. So just want to show you what this is looking like. So this is all they have under Judah Maccabees fighting, or this, this is where they roam. It's not really they have it. And then under Jonathan, they're going to get to the point where they're destroying some cities down here, and they're over here. Modin was their father's original hometown. And then they get Jaffa in the days of Simon. They've now got this. So they've got a little bit of territory. So they've got from the mountains over here and a little bit on the other side of the Jordan River all the way down here to Jaffa now. So that's how big their kingdom is. And it's not really a kingdom. It's just they keep bribing whoever's in charge, and it gets that big. Most of this growth you see, that where they get almost to the original size of the kingdom of Israel, was under John Hyrcanus forward, where John Hyrcanus gets the independence because the Greek kingdom completely falls apart. And then they start conquering their neighbors. So it says, in his day, it says, every man sat under his vine and his fig tree, and there was none to fray them, just like in the Messianic provinces. And then it says, they strengthened all those, the people who were brought low, the law he searched out, and every contemptor of the law and wicked person he took away. He beautified the sanctuary and multiplied the temples and the vessel. And when it was heard at Rome as far away as Sparta that Jonathan was dead, they were very sorry. So Simon's now in charge, and Jonathan's dead, and they're sending letters saying, oh, we're sorry he's dead. I thought you guys were our allies and you were going to come help. Yeah, we didn't really mean that. We were just being nice because, we might try to put a base there later, and you guys just wanted some legitimacy. We're not actually going to help you. They wrote them to him in tables of brass to renew the friendship and league that they had with Judas and his brethren. So notice it's this crap that they keep doing that is going to get the Romans to come in and take over. Because they keep, in order to legitimize themselves, going back and forth with the Romans and the Spartans and saying, don't we have a league together? Aren't we friends? Aren't your rulers acknowledging the legitimacy of our rule? And they're like, oh, yeah. We're not helping them. There's no commitment. But sure, you guys can be in charge there. That's fine. And then it says, the rulers of the Lacedaemonians, the city, that's the Lacedaemonians of the Spartans. Sparta is the city. The Lacedaemonians are the people. With the city unto Simon the high priest, the elders of the residue of brethren. They're going to talk about the league of friendship that they had with them. And then it says in the 112th year, so this is 172 of Alexander's reign, you're looking at, this is the 130s. This is about where this is going to come to an end. It ends in 10 pages. This King Demetrius is going to confirm the high priesthood again to him. And Simon accepts it, and he's pleased to be a priest and a captain and governor of all the Jews. So he essentially is a vassal to this Demetrius, who beats this Tryphon. And then he gets the Romans to legitimize him again. And then they send the Romans a shield of gold of 1,000 pounds, in order that, it says, if therefore there be any pestilent fellows that have fled from their country unto you, deliver them to Simon the high priest, that he may punish them according to their laws. So in other words, he's basically getting extradition rights for Jews who flee from his rule. So what he's doing is he's taking over Israel by force by dealing with their allies when they're a Hamas. Think Hamas or Hezbollah with Iran as a client state, basically ruling over all the other people whose lives are miserable. That's what they're doing. And we're going to have Sharia law. That's exactly what they're doing. We're forcing you to be circumcised, or we're going to kill you. And so it says, listen to this, and all to the countries and to the Samsemes. Remember how I told you these guys are probably descended from Samsemes, or from Samson? To all the countries and to the Samsemes and to the Lacedaemonians, which are the Spartans, which are descended from Hercules, and Delos and Midas and Sicilian and Caria and Samos, Pamphylia and Lycia and Halicarnassus and Rhodes and Ardis and Kos and Side and Aradus and Gortina and Nidus, Cyprus and Cyrene. They're writing to all these people to basically say, we're the rightful authority of Israel. If anyone flees from our country to you, send them back to us so we can deal with them. In other words, we don't want any rivals to the throne or the priesthood here. So that's what they're doing. And it says, so Antiochus the king camped. Oh, so we have another Antiochus rising up. And it looks like they're still fighting Tryphon, so they haven't really defeated him yet. And it says at that time, listen to this. This is this is so weird. Remember how they keep switching sides. So remember how Demetrius is Tryphon's rival, and he's fighting against Tryphon. And it says, and Antiochus the king camped against Dora the second day, assaulting it continually and making engines, by which means he shut up Tryphon so that he could neither go in or go out. All that time Simon sent him 2,000 chosen men to aid him, silver also and gold and much armor. Nevertheless he would not receive him, but break all the covenants which he had made with him before, and became strange to him. Furthermore he sent Athenobius, one of his friends, to commune with him and say, you withhold Joppa and Gezerah with the tower that is in Jerusalem, which are the cities of my realm. The borders thereof you have wasted and done great hurt to the land, and have gotten dominion from many places within my kingdom. So I don't know if this is Antiochus Jr., who Tryphon was going to kill. But what ends up happening with him, remember how Demetrius is taking over this kingdom, this rival kingdom. So you have Antiochus, you have, this is so confusing. You have Antiochus, Tryphon, Demetrius. So they're all rivals for the kingdom. And then you have Ptolemy down here, and then that guy dies. Well, he has a son, because they could just keep having more Ptolemies. And basically, John and Simon are dealing with everybody they can who will legitimize them. And they're not really holding any loyalty to anyone's side because they don't know who's going to win. And what ends up happening is they defend this Antiochus against, or Tryphus against Antiochus, Tryphon against Antiochus, or vice versa. They send soldiers and money to his help. They claim this fealty to Demetrius, who makes them the high priest. And then afterwards, Simon is going to, and his sons, this is Simon, this is the third brother, remember, he is going to go have a banquet, I think, in Docus, which is somewhere near Jericho. And this Ptolemy, which I think is the next descendant of the Ptolemy king of Egypt, who lost his, kingdom up there, he goes and kills Jonathan, kills him and his sons, gets them all drunk and kills them. And apparently, it's then at this time John Hyrcanus, his son, takes over for the remnant of the Jews that remain. So there's nothing in this entire history that says, wow, these guys are good and noble and successful and competent. They just keep trying to bribe their way and loyalty their way into getting their own legitimacy, and they never quite have it, and they keep getting killed. You're talking about 3 different brothers getting killed in the space of 18 years. That's not, just so you get a frame of reference, the last 3 sons of Josiah to rule in before Jerusalem was taken captive was 22 years. And they had a slightly bigger territory, but they had 22 years, and then they were taken into captivity and Jerusalem was destroyed. They've gone through, from the whole revolt has been like 6 years of Matthias, and then like 18 or 19 years with the three brothers. And the three brothers are dead, and John Hyrcanus is the first one from the third generation from Matthias. So this is the grandson of Matthias, and he's taken over at this time. So in this first Maccabees, there's nothing about God. He's not mentioned once. They mention praying, but they don't mention God. They don't mention angels. They don't mention the resurrection of the dead. They don't mention anything supernatural in this entire book. Okay? Because these guys are the Sadducees. All they're in it for is the politics. They're just basically a terrorist faction who wants to use zeal for the law to become the rulers. That's it. Because their dad was a priest, and they've basically usurped the priesthood and usurped the rule of Judea, and they don't care about anything but the politics. They just want to be recognized by the foreign governments as the legitimate rulers of Jerusalem, and they want those foreign governments to give up anyone who's going to oppose them and flee to another country. That's it. It's all you have in First Maccabees. Second Maccabees is trying to make it sound more glorious, but First Maccabees is trying to make it sound like Judah Maccabeus is the Messiah. And probably around this time, you're going to have the Septuagint get published. You probably have some of the first 5 books of Moses, and maybe some of the prophets translated into Greek by now. But remember how I told you that you don't have any mention of Daniel in Sirach. Well, the Daniel that they have, this is the Old Greek Daniel. So this is the original Greek version of Daniel that they have. They're going to change it. It's very different than the Daniel we have. And this is it right here. And when you go to Daniel 9, where it's going to talk about the prophecy of the Messiah coming, it doesn't mention the Messiah. They change it. They say, the King of Nations will demolish the city and the sanctuary along with the Anointed One. So the city and the sanctuary are going to be destroyed, and the Anointed One is going to be destroyed. Well, who is that? That's supposed to be Judah Maccabeus. He was killed after the city was destroyed, after the sanctuary was wrecked. And his consummation will come with wrath even till the consummation. He will be attacked through war, and the covenant will prevail for many, and it will return again and be rebuilt broad and long. And the consummation of the times, even after 7 years and 70 times and 62 times until the time of the consummation, even of the war, even desolation will be removed. They're changing it to sound like what Judah Maccabees did. And the covenant prevails for many weeks, and in the half of the week the sacrifice and libation will cease. In the temple there will be an abomination of desolation until the consummation of a season, and the consummation will be given for a desolation. So remember, they change it from 2 years to just over 3 years, and they have a half a week, so 3.5 years, of the desolation. Which we say the desolation of the temple is 2,300 days, based on Daniel 8, but they forgot to fix that part. And it says, "In the vision and the decree was true, and the forceful multitude will understand the decree." This is how they change it. Okay, this is comparing the Theodotion version that the early church changed and fixed in Greek. It says, "In the 3rd year of Cyrus of Persians, the word revealed to Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the word was genuine, and great power and understanding was given to him in the vision." It says, "And the vision and the decree was true, and the forceful multitude will understand the decree, and I understood it by means of the vision." Do you see how he changes it? He's saying the forceful multitude. Who is that? Oh, that's going to be the violent uprising. They're going to understand this vision. So they're changing it to justify the Maccabean revolt. And that's what I would assume a lot of your Maccabean writings are going to, or a lot of your Septuagint writings are going to come from. So this kind of ends with John Hyrcanus right here. And you see this is 134 when he finally takes over. It starts in 166, ends in 134. So this entire thing is 32 years. John Hyrcanus is going to take over in 34. I'm sorry. So the last of these guys is going to die in 35. So it is close to 30 years plus their dad. So let's say 25 years of the three brothers. John Hyrcanus is going to take over, and then after he's done, I think his kids are all going to die before he's done. Or no, it's 104, and then his sons are going to die in 103, 107, and 103. So all his sons are going to die within a year of him being done. And Alexander is going to be in charge. And this Alexandra is going to be the one who gives the power to bind and loose to the Pharisees. So she's leaning away from the Sadducee anti-angel, anti-resurrection stuff. And John Hyrcanus' 2 grandsons are going to go into a civil war after her. You see, she's in 67, so she rules for about 9 years. And then his grandsons are going to go into a civil war over the throne, and that is going to lead to the Romans to step in and basically say, you're out, you're in, and then they're eventually going to replace him with the Herods within 30 years. So this doesn't last long. It's a corrupt monarchy. They're fighting each other. They're just exactly like the Greeks. They're no different. You have the most legitimate of them is probably going to be Alexandra, and she's just a queen. She's just ruling by default, basically. Everyone else is just scandalous. He's trying to claim to be a Messiah. He's trying to claim that his brother was a Messiah, and his uncle was the Messiah, and he's the second Messiah. And then his daughter is basically going to give the authority. It's because of this you have the Sadducees and the Pharisees co-ruling over the Jews. It's because she puts the Pharisees in charge, and this was the Sadducees before that. And these guys ripped off the temple. They ripped off the priesthood from the legitimate heirs. So there's literally nothing redeemable about these guys. There's nothing good about them. They're just con artists and violent guys. And you could say, well, it started out with them fighting the Greeks over, there was 2 years when the Greeks were violating the temple. Yes, they did that. Yes, they delivered the temple. But none of that justified them getting the kingship or the priesthood. Because after that, the Greeks only threatened to violate the temple again if they didn't give up Judah Maccabees. And if Judah really cared, he'd have been like, if you guys leave the temple alone, I'll give myself up. But he didn't. He cared about himself and his rule. And that's why when they offered to make him king, he was willing to stand down. So that's the end. So in summary, to close this Apocrypha series, this is what we have here. This is the timeline I have here. Sirach is written around 180 after the reign of Onias the priest. Onias reigns to around 195 it's BC. I should say BCE. And then Jerusalem gets whatever they call the Abomination of Desolation, but they get their libraries destroyed in 167. So that's 13 years after this is written. Judah Maccabeus apparently rebuilds the library. That's what they're saying in that short time of peace they have, and they start collecting these writings. So most of these writings are to be collected between 160 and 165. Nicanor is defeated by him in 161, and then Judah Maccabeus is going to die not long after that. So Second Maccabees, which is written first, is going to be written in this period of peace after Nicanor is defeated, and I'm estimating it to be just a few years of peace. And so Second Maccabees would be written before Judah dies, but after he defeats Nicanor. In the next generation, it's going to be a few years after it's written, Jonathan is going to buy the priesthood from Ptolemy in 153. So you're going to see that, and it's probably around this time you have First Esdras written, trying to reconcile the Ezra and Nehemiah timelines because they don't make sense to them. And the additions to Esther seem to be based on them mixing up Ahasuerus, or Xerxes and Artaxerxes, basically. They're mixing them up. And so they're changing both of these to try to make these things make sense. But one of the things that they're trying to show is that they're actually trying to make Esdras, this is important, Esdras, a son of Salathiel, and they're trying to merge him and Zerubbabel together. Why? Because it kind of looks like if you're from the priesthood, you could be from the Davidic line too. That might be why, I'm not sure. But that stuff's more in Second Ezra, so I'm not certain on that. But what you're having is they're fudging together these records. They're trying to make sense of history the way that they can. And then it's around that time, 137 BCE, that Sirach's grandson translates it into Greek. It's around that time you're going to get Tobit written, because the Tobiads are trying to legitimize themselves, and this may be earlier, because you have these Tobiads mentioned over and over, but it's hard to tell when they had favor. We know that in the days of Nehemiah, they're basically, remember, this guy gets an apartment in the temple, in the priest chambers, because he's apparently a guy with money and he's bribing his way into stuff. Judith is probably picked up around this time too. It talks about the priest having rule of Judea in the days of Nebuchadnezzar, which was never true. There was no temple, no priest, no anything in that time. And then you have First Maccabees, which is going to be the last of these things written, and I have it estimated around 135, because it's written to legitimize John Hyrcanus' rule. What it's trying to demonstrate is how his forebears, and ultimately ended up as his father, got the rule, and so he's going to claim succession from his father. He gives away that they pretty much bribed their way to get it, but the point is that they got it, and that the surrounding nations recognize that legitimacy. That seems to be what's going on here. And at that time, you seem to have the changes to Daniel, which are going to corroborate First Maccabees, which is meant to make Judas look like the first Messiah. So that would be Messiah ben David, I guess, and him to be Messiah ben Joseph, something like that. I'm not sure. Wisdom and Esdras are written later. Wisdom is probably 100 CE, and Second Esdras is written as late as 400 CE, probably in the Roman Catholic period. So that's what you got. These are your Apocrypha. There's none of them that you need for anything. You can get some history around it, but it's bad history, and you can get some context mostly from Sirach and the Maccabees. Everything else is junk. It's just junk. You could get some early Jewish Christian context from Wisdom, but nothing that you should take doctrine from, essentially. So that's it. I don't want to talk about this stuff anymore. That's why these videos are so long. I just want to be done with it. But that's where I'm ending with this. Again, I might pick up on this series because I'm going to be working on researching for my Serpent by the Way book for probably the next year, before I really try to get it close to publish. And I probably will go back and go after some of the Gnostic writings after that and show you guys, break that down, where that stuff comes from. But for now, I am pushing the pause on this. I'm just going to focus on Bible teaching and eschatology for a while. And I hope you guys have been blessed by this series. I hope this adds to your knowledge. The lesson is, don't walk away from these books. But if you look at them with the history, understand this is just the sordid rule of the Hasmoneans trying to legitimize their claim to rule over Israel and have the priesthood, which was never theirs. The high priesthood was never theirs. It never belonged to them. It shouldn't have gone to them. Okay? So I hope you guys are blessed. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.